He threw the envelope at her feet, right there, on the station platform, in front of everyone. Bram Harker didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just crossed his arms, tilted his chin up, and said it loud enough for half of Raven Hollow to hear. "I changed my mind. You're not what I expected." Elowen Voss stood there with one worn suitcase, $43 to her name, and nowhere to go. She had crossed 400 miles on a promise, and the man who made that promise was already walking away. If that had been you, standing alone in the cold, every eye in town on your face, what would you have done? Would you have cried, begged, turned, and left? Elowen did none of those things, and what she did instead changed everything. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories about real courage, real heartbreak, and people who refuse to let the worst moment of their lives become the last chapter. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that platform. Because what happened next, nobody in Raven Hollow saw coming. Well, the train had been running late. Of course it had. Elowen had been on it for 11 hours, sitting upright in a hard wooden seat, watching the landscape outside the window slowly drain of everything familiar. Green hills replaced by flat brown earth, farms replaced by scrub pine and emptiness. The neat little towns she had grown up near replaced by settlements that looked less like destinations and more like places where people had simply stopped moving and decided to make do. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she started to doze, some lurch of the car or some distant whistle snapped her back. She spent most of the ride running through the letter again in her head, the one Bram Harker had written her through the agency 3 months ago. Neat handwriting, careful sentences. A man who said he owned 40 acres outside a settlement called Raven Hollow. A man who said he needed a capable woman, that his ranch required someone practical, someone who didn't mind hard work and cold winters. Elowen had written back once, told him the truth about herself. No family left, no inheritance coming. Worked as a seamstress and a cook's helper since she was 15. Not beautiful in any magazine sense of the word, but healthy and capable and not afraid of difficult. He had replied within 2 weeks. Said she sounded exactly right. She had used her last savings, almost everything, to purchase the ticket. So when the train finally groaned to a stop and Elowen stepped down onto the platform with her one suitcase and the particular feeling of someone who is committed to something irreversible, she was already calculating. She told herself she was calm. She told herself she was practical. She was terrified. The platform at Raven Hollow was barely a platform. A few rough-cut boards, a covered overhang to keep the worst of the weather off, a hand-painted sign that had been weathered nearly illegible. 3 or 4 men stood around in the early afternoon chill, and Elowen scanned their faces quickly, looking for someone who might match the letter's careful tone. Someone who might look, even vaguely, like someone who had been expecting her. She spotted Bram Harker immediately. Not because she recognized him. She had no photograph, but because he was the only man there who was actively looking her over. The way you look at something delivered to your door that you're not entirely sure you ordered. He was taller than she imagined. Dark coat, good boots, the kind of jaw that probably passed for handsome in local opinion. He wasn't smiling. That should have told her something. Elowen walked toward him. She kept her chin level. She had learned a long time ago that the moment you let your chin drop, people start treating you differently. "Mr. Harker," she said, "I'm Elowen Voss." He looked at her, not a quick look. A long, slow, deliberate inspection. The kind that moved from her face down to her coat and her suitcase and back up again. The kind that made her feel like livestock being assessed before purchase. Then he reached into his coat. He pulled out a thick envelope, and he set it down on the platform rail between them. "I had a man write to the agency last week," Bram said. His voice was flat. Matter of fact. Like he was discussing weather. "Told them I was withdrawing the arrangement." Elowen looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. "The letter wouldn't have reached them before your train departed," he continued, "which is unfortunate. I apologize for that." There were people watching. She could feel it without looking. The 2 men near the overhang, a woman across the muddy street who had stopped walking and was pretending she hadn't. A boy of about 12 perched on a fence post, open-mouthed. "You're canceling," Elowen said. It wasn't a question. She needed to hear herself say the word out loud because part of her brain was still trying to find another explanation. I've changed my mind. Bram picked up the envelope and held it toward her. This contains what I paid the agency for their services and what I believe covers basic travel expenses back to wherever you came from. I think that's fair. Elowen looked at the envelope. She looked at Bram. You're not what I expected, he said, quieter, but not quiet enough. Not in that thin, cold air, with those people standing around. I need someone who can... I had certain expectations about... He stopped. Didn't finish. And somehow the unfinished sentence was worse than anything he might have actually said. Elowen reached out and took the envelope. She held it a moment without opening it. She could feel the edges of whatever bills were inside, could feel the exact dimensions of how little dignity she had left in this town she had arrived in 16 minutes ago. She set the envelope back down on the rail. She turned and she walked to the far end of the platform. She did not cry. She wanted to, desperately, in the way you want to when your body hasn't caught up with what just happened, when your face is already burning and your throat is doing that specific tightening thing that means the tears are right there, right at the surface. She did not let them come. She turned her back on Bram Harker and she stood at the end of the platform and she breathed, slow, deliberate, and she watched the train that had brought her here begin to pull away. That was when she understood the exact dimension of her problem. She had no ticket back, not even close. The money in that envelope might have covered it if she'd taken it, but she had not taken it, and she was not going back to take it now. Even if she had, and some cold small voice in her head was telling her she probably should have, she had nowhere to return to. The room she had rented for the last 2 years in a boarding house in Clearfield had been given up. She had settled her accounts. She had said the appropriate goodbyes. She had left. There was no back. She stood at the end of the platform with her suitcase at her feet, winter pressing down on the afternoon like a hand pushing on the top of a jar, and she thought, all right, so this is where we are. Across the muddy street, a man was watching her. He wasn't being subtle about it. He stood outside what looked like a feed supply building, arms folded, work coat damp at the shoulders like he'd been out in it earlier. He was broad-shouldered and not young, with the kind of face that gets lined early from squinting into weather and working in it. He wasn't handsome in any obvious way. He looked like a man who had gotten used to solving problems without a great deal of help. He wasn't looking at her the way Bram had looked at her. He was looking at her the way you look at something that you're trying to understand. Elowen held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. She picked up her suitcase. She needed to find somewhere to sit down, somewhere inside, somewhere that wasn't a platform, and figure out what came next. She made it about 15 feet down the main street before the woman she had noticed earlier stepped into her path. Not aggressively, just into her general direction, close enough that stopping was the only option. You must be freezing, the woman said. She was perhaps 60, with the particular manner of someone who has run a business long enough to assess people quickly and without much sentimentality. Mavis Perrin, I run the dry goods. You need somewhere to sit? Elowen looked at her. She was trying to decide how much sympathy was safe to accept from a stranger in a town where she had been publicly rejected 11 minutes ago. I'm fine, she said. You're not fine. Mavis said it without cruelty, just as a fact. Bram Harker just did that in front of half the street. You don't have to be fine. Come inside for a few minutes. Elowen considered the street behind her, the town that was still watching, pretending not to, the temperature that was sitting somewhere around what her body was registering as genuinely dangerous by nightfall. She followed Mavis inside. The dry goods store was cluttered and warm and smelled like sawdust and dried herbs. Mavis put a stool near the small iron stove in the corner without making any particular ceremony of it, and poured 2 cups of something from a pot that had been sitting there long enough to be almost too strong. Elowen sat. She held the cup in both hands. She breathed. How much do you have? Mavis asked, not unkindly. $43. Ticket back? No. Family somewhere? Elowen shook her head. Mavis made a small sound. Not quite a sigh, not quite anything else. She looked at Elowen for a moment and then said, Bram Harker's a fool for what it's worth. He's been a fool for years and he just keeps finding new ways to prove it. That doesn't help me much. No, Mavis agreed. I suppose it doesn't. The door opened. The man from across the street came in. He did not come in loudly. He came in the way a large person comes through a door when they've learned to be careful about it. Shoulders slightly angled, not filling up the whole entrance just because they could. He nodded at Mavis, looked at Elowen, and said nothing for a moment. Rourke, Mavis said, like that was explanation enough. Rourke Halden, the man said to Elowen. He didn't offer his hand, which she appreciated. Handshakes felt like too much right now. I have a homestead about 3 miles out. I know who you are, Mavis said to him, with a slight edge that suggested she was trying to understand what he was doing here specifically. Elowen Voss, Elowen said to him. I know. He sat down on the edge of a crate near the far wall like a man who had no intention of looming. I heard what happened out there. So did everyone. He didn't argue with that. I've got 2 kids, he said. 13 and 7. I've been trying to run a horse breeding operation and keep the property maintained at the same time for going on 18 months. I'm not managing either one of those things as well as I need to. Elowen looked at him. I have a back room, Rourke said. It was the original storage room when my wife and I first built the property. It's got a door that locks, which I mentioned because I want to be clear that it's a private space. Meals come with the place. If you're willing to work, and I'm asking because I need actual help, not company, I can pay you a wage through spring. Silence. Elowen looked at this man who she had never met before. In this town, where she had now been publicly humiliated in front of an audience. In this season where the sky outside the window was the particular shade of gray that meant snow was not hypothetical. Through spring, she said. Through spring, he confirmed. If you want to leave before then, I won't ask you to stay. If the situation doesn't work out for any reason, I'll make sure you have what you need to get somewhere else. That's a promise I'll put in writing if it helps. What kind of work? He looked like the question was the one he'd been hoping for. Whatever needs doing. My horses need attention. The kitchen is functional, but barely. The winter stores are disorganized, and I think some of it's already gone bad. The children need someone steady present when I'm out in the fields. If you've got any skill with animals or food or repairs, all 3 of those things are problems at my place right now. I'm not a mother, Elowen said. She said it directly, because she needed to be clear. I'll work. I won't perform. I'm not asking you to perform, Rourke said. I'm asking if you can cook. Something flickered across Elowen's face, something brief and unreadable. Yes, she said. I can cook. Then do you want the room? Elowen looked at her cup. She looked at her suitcase on the floor by the stove. She thought about $43 and a winter that had already started turning mean. She thought about that platform and Bram Harker's flat voice and the envelope sitting on the rail. I'll need to see the room first, she said. Rourke nodded like that was exactly what he would have said. Fair enough. They left 20 minutes later, Elowen's suitcase in the back of his wagon, both of them sitting on the bench without speaking, watching the settlement of Raven Hollow slowly give way to fields, and then to the particular emptiness of land that hadn't been fully tamed yet. The sky was getting lower. Elowen could feel it. She had grown up in hard winters, and she knew that particular pressure in the air, that particular quality of light that meant something serious was about 8 or 9 hours away. She pulled her coat tighter and said nothing. Rourke drove without talking. He wasn't the kind of man who filled silence with noise. She understood that already. It was either a very good sign or a complicated one. She hadn't decided. 3 miles out, the homestead appeared at the edge of a low hill. A main house with a stone chimney, a barn that was larger than the house and significantly worse for wear, a series of smaller outbuildings connected by paths that had been worn into the ground by years of back and forth. There were horses visible in the paddock, more inside the barn she could hear. The whole property had the feeling of something that had been built with intention and was now being maintained through sheer stubbornness. A girl was standing in the doorway of the house, 7 years old maybe, small for it. She had dark hair and her father's way of standing very still, and she was looking at Elowen with the particular intensity of a child who hasn't decided yet what to think, but is going to form a very firm opinion in the next few minutes. Rourke climbed down from the wagon. Maisie, he said. Who is she? Maisie said. This is Miss Voss. She's going to be helping out for a while. Maisie continued her assessment. Doesn't she make biscuits? Maisie, I can make biscuits, Elowen said. She climbed down from the wagon with her suitcase. She looked at the girl directly, Not in a performing friendliness way, just straight on. I can make several kinds. Maisie appeared to find this an acceptable answer. She stepped back from the doorway to allow entry. The house was exactly what Rourke had described, functional, cold in the corners. The kitchen smelled like old grease and something else underneath it, something Elowen's nose filed immediately as concerning a soft, almost sweetish smell that she associated with food going bad in a contained space. There was a boy sitting at the table. 13. He looked up at Elowen when she came in, and whatever expression he'd been wearing went neutral in a specific way. Not polite neutral, not shy neutral, but the particular neutrality of someone bracing for something they've already decided they don't want. "Tobin," Rourke said. Tobin said nothing. Elowen put her suitcase down. She looked around the kitchen, at the shelves, at the storage area in the corner, at the condition of the hearth, at the pile of clothing near the door that had been waiting to be mended for what looked like at least 2 months. She looked at Tobin. "You don't have to talk to me," she said. "I'm not here to make you." Tobin's jaw shifted slightly. "I'm here to work," Elowen said. "That's it." She picked up her suitcase and looked at Rourke. "You said there was a room." He showed her. It was smaller than she expected, but the door locked exactly as promised, and there was a narrow window that looked out toward the barn and the fields beyond. It was cold in the way rooms get cold when no one's been in them, but there was a small iron stove in the corner and wood stacked beside it. Elowen set her suitcase on the floor and looked at the room. She thought about Bram Harker's flat voice. She thought about the platform. She thought about $43 and nowhere to go and the way her entire carefully built plan had folded in on itself in about 45 seconds on a wooden dock in front of strangers. She breathed. She began unpacking her suitcase. An hour later, she was in the kitchen discovering the source of that smell. A corner of the dry goods shelf where a bag of grain had been sitting against damp wood long enough for mold to start threading through its base. And she was pulling everything off the shelf systematically, checking each container, separating what was salvageable from what wasn't, when she heard Rourke come through the back door. He stopped. He looked at the shelf, at the organized piles on the table, at Elowen in the middle of it. "You didn't have to start tonight," he said. "The grain's bad," she said. She held up the bag. "Not all of it. Maybe the top third is fine if you dry it, but the rest needs to go. And you've got moisture in this wall that's going to keep causing the same problem if you don't address it before spring." Rourke looked at the bag. Something moved across his face. Something complicated, like a man absorbing information that explained a problem he'd been trying to solve from the wrong direction. "I lost 2 horses this fall," he said. "Thought it was just the season." "It might have been partly the season," Elowen said, "but you've been feeding them compromised grain." He stood there for a moment. "I'll fix the wall," he said finally. "I know you will," Elowen said. She turned back to the shelf. She was already here. She was already working. She had made her decision in the cold of that platform, and she was not in the habit of undoing decisions. Whatever Raven Hollow thought about the unwanted bride who'd turned up with one suitcase, whatever stories they were already starting to tell about her, none of it changed this. There was a wall that needed fixing, and grain to save, and 2 children in this house who had been trying to hold something together without enough hands. She would be one more pair. That was all. That was enough to start. The first morning at the Halden homestead, Elowen woke before anyone else. That wasn't unusual for her. She had spent enough years in small rooms in houses that belonged to other people to understand that the first hour of daylight belonged to whoever was willing to claim it. She dressed in the cold, lit the small stove in her room with 2 pieces of wood from the stack beside it, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed for exactly 3 minutes, which was the amount of time she allowed herself to feel whatever she was feeling before she put it away and went to work. What she was feeling, specifically, was a complicated mixture of relief and something that hadn't earned a name yet. Relief because she had a roof and a locked door and a stove that worked. The unnamed thing because yesterday had happened, and her body hadn't forgotten it yet, even if her mind had agreed to move on. She put it away. She went to the kitchen. The kitchen at the Halden house was the kind of kitchen that told you everything about the last 18 months of a person's life. It wasn't dirty. Rourke or somebody had been keeping basic order, but it had the particular quality of a space that had been maintained by someone doing their absolute best while running out of time and energy for it. Things were put away in the wrong places. The cast iron skillet had rust starting on the rim that a little salt and oil would fix. The shelf organization she had begun last night revealed that half the spices were nearly empty, and the ones that were full were the ones nobody used. Elowen built up the kitchen fire. She found what she had to work with. There wasn't a great deal, but there was enough. And she started breakfast. She was not performing. She had said that to Rourke, and she had meant it. She made breakfast because there were children in this house, and children needed to eat something hot in the morning, especially when winter was doing what it was doing outside that window, which was sitting heavy and gray and threatening. She made biscuits because the girl had asked about them, not because she was trying to buy anything. Maisie appeared at the kitchen doorway about 20 minutes later in her nightdress, with her hair in a state that suggested she'd been awake for a while but had been working up to coming in. She stopped in the doorway and stared. "You're already cooking," she said. "I am. Papa usually just does porridge." "There'll be porridge too," Elowen said. "Biscuits take longer, so they go in first." Maisie came 3 steps into the kitchen. Not all the way, but far enough to see the pan on the fire. "What's in them?" "Flour, butter, a little salt. The butter's almost gone, so I'll need your father to get more from town. But there was enough for this morning." Maisie seemed to be calculating whether to come further into the room or stay where she was. She stayed where she was. "Mama used to make biscuits on Sundays," she said. She said it very carefully, like someone testing how much weight a floorboard would hold. Elowen didn't say anything for a moment. She kept her hands moving, kept her eyes on what she was doing. "What kind did she make?" "With honey. She put honey on top before they went in." "That sounds good," Elowen said. "I don't have honey this morning, but I could put some in next time if your father has any." "He has some," Maisie said. "It's in the cupboard on the left side, the jar with the red cloth on top." "Then next time," Elowen said. Maisie came all the way into the kitchen and sat down at the table. She didn't talk again for several minutes, but she stayed, which Elowen understood was not a small thing. Tobin came down when the food was almost ready, dressed already in his work clothes, and he came in the way he'd been doing everything since Elowen had arrived, with a quality of preemptive defensiveness, like a person getting ready to not need something before anyone could offer it. He sat at the table across from his sister and looked at the food Elowen put in front of him without saying anything. Elowen put a plate in front of each of them and went back to the stove. She didn't comment on the fact that Tobin ate 3 biscuits. She noticed, because she noticed everything, but she said nothing about it. Rourke came in from outside just as she was pouring the coffee. He had already been out. She could tell by his coat and the smell of hay on his boots. And he stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the kitchen table with both children sitting at it, and food on the table and the fire going properly for the first time in what looked like it might have been several weeks. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I know," Elowen said. She held out a cup of coffee. "Sit down. I need to talk to you about the storage situation before you go back out." He sat down. He took the coffee. He looked at her across the table with an expression that was difficult to read. Not wary, not grateful, something more measured than either of those. "The dry goods shelf is manageable," Elowen said. "I lost maybe a third of the grain, but I dried what I could save, and it should be fine now. The problem is the wall behind it. There's a crack somewhere in the stonework, probably where the mortar's gone between the outside and the interior. And when the temperature drops far enough, moisture is going to keep pushing through. If you don't fix it before the serious cold comes, you're going to lose that whole corner of storage." Rourke put his cup down. "I know about the crack." "Then you know it needs to be fixed soon." "I know." He said it with the particular tone of someone who has had a list of things that needed doing and has been choosing daily which emergencies to put ahead of which other emergencies. "I haven't had— I can keep the children occupied in the afternoon," Elowen said. "If that's what's been stopping you." He looked at her. "That's not me saying I'm their caretaker," she added quickly. "That's me saying if time is the problem and children underfoot is part of the time problem, I can help with that part while you do the repair." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "Also," Elowen said, "your horses." He stilled. "I walked through the barn this morning, early, before the children were up. I won't pretend I know as much about horses as you do. I don't. But 3 of the ones in the far stall aren't eating the way they should, and one of them was coughing overnight. I heard it from my room. I don't know if that's connected to the grain problem or if it's something else starting, but I thought you should know I noticed." Rourke was already getting up from the table. He hadn't finished his breakfast. "The food will stay warm," Elowen said. He was already out the door. She looked at the two children. Maisie was watching her with a kind of careful attention. Tobin was looking at his plate. "He does that," Maisie said, "when it's about the horses." "I figured," Elowen said. She sat down with her own coffee and her own plate, and she ate her breakfast at the table with the two children in a silence that was not entirely comfortable but was not hostile either, which she counted as something. The first week was like that. Elowen working, Rourke working, both of them largely parallel. Two people managing separate emergencies in the same house, occasionally overlapping long enough to exchange information. He told her what he needed done. She did it, and then kept going past what he'd asked. He didn't comment on the extra work. She didn't ask him to. Maisie followed her around constantly. Not always talking, sometimes just present, appearing at Elowen's elbow while she was mending clothing or reorganizing the pantry, sitting nearby with something of her own to do, or sometimes just watching. Elowen accepted this the way she accepted weather. It was happening, and the most useful response was to continue doing what she was doing. Tobin kept his distance, not dramatically. He ate at the same table, he slept under the same roof, he occasionally answered direct questions with direct answers. But he held something back in the way a door can be in a room with you without being open, and Elowen understood instinctively that pushing against it would be exactly the wrong thing to do. On the fourth day, she found him in the barn. She had gone out to check on the horses. Rourke had confirmed it was respiratory, had treated the worst of the three, and the others were improving. And Tobin was in the far corner of the barn, sitting on a hay bale with a piece of wood in his hand and a small knife, carving something that she couldn't make out yet. He heard her come in, and his hand stopped moving. "I'm checking the water situation," Elowen said. She didn't look at him directly. "The buckets in the back stalls were low this morning." "I was going to do that," Tobin said. "I got there first," she said. It's not a criticism." She filled the buckets. She checked the condition of the stall bedding, found two areas that needed changing out, noted it mentally for later. She was almost done before Tobin spoke again. "What are you carving?" she asked, because she hadn't planned to ask, but she looked over at the wrong moment, and the shape of whatever he was making caught her eye. He held it up slightly. A horse. It was rough. He clearly hadn't been doing this long, but the shape was recognizable. More importantly, the attention in it was recognizable. The way he'd been trying to get the angle of the neck right. "That's hard to get," Elowen said. "The neck angle on a horse. Most people make them too vertical." Tobin looked at the carving. "It looks wrong." "It looks like a first try," she said. "That's not the same as wrong." He didn't say anything to that. Elowen finished with the water and went back to the house. But she noticed 2 days later that the carving on the hay bale had a different neck angle. He'd worked on it. The second week brought two things that changed the quality of the tension in the house. The first was town. Rourke took Elowen with him on a supply run because the list had gotten long enough to require help carrying, and because it was practical, and because he didn't appear to put much stock in what people thought about practical decisions. But Ravenhollow had opinions that practical decisions didn't especially diffuse. Elowen noticed it the moment they came down the main street. The particular quality of attention that a small settlement develops when it's been talking about someone. The way conversations that were happening between two people suddenly involve a lot of glancing sideways. Mavis from the dry goods store came out and gave Elowen a look that was equal parts sympathy and warning, which Elowen appreciated even if she couldn't yet interpret exactly what needed warning about. She found out when they were loading the second wagon at the back of the feed store, and a woman she didn't know came around the corner with the specific purpose of a person who has been waiting. The woman was perhaps 45, well-dressed for Ravenhollow, with the kind of manner that suggested she had decided opinions and considered sharing them a service to the community. "Mr. Halden," she said in the tone of someone who has not come to speak to Mr. Halden. Rourke said, "Mrs. Calvert," in the tone of someone who already knows where this is going. "I wanted to say," Mrs. Calvert said, turning slightly toward Elowen and then back to Rourke, which was a very deliberate physical choice, that the ladies from the settlement church have been concerned. A woman in the home without there are children to consider. We only want to make sure everything is being conducted appropriately," Rourke said. "Yes." "Elowen Voss is an employee of my household," Rourke said. She has her own room with a lock on it, which I mention because I understand that's a detail that tends to matter to certain conversations. She's doing skilled work in exchange for wages. That's the arrangement. Of course, Mrs. Calvert said. She was still not looking directly at Elowen. It's just that her situation, given how she arrived. Her situation, Elowen said, is that a man made an arrangement with me and then broke it, and I had the bad luck of arriving in this town at the end of the process. That's all her situation is. Mrs. Calvert looked at her now. I'm not interesting, Elowen continued. I'm working. Those are two different things, and they're both fairly private. She picked up one of the supply bags and put it in the wagon. I hope the rest of your day is good, ma'am. She climbed into the wagon and waited. Rourke loaded the last two bags without saying anything to Mrs. Calvert, climbed up beside Elowen, and they drove out of town in a silence that lasted about 2 minutes before Rourke said, You didn't have to do that. I know. She'll talk about it. She was going to talk about it no matter what I said, Elowen said. At least now I get to be the subject of her conversation rather than just the object of it. Something crossed Rourke's face. Not quite a smile. Close. He looked back at the road. The second thing that changed the quality of tension in the house that week was Tobin. It started with the bread. Elowen had been making bread most mornings. Not elaborate, just the basic working bread that kept a household going. And she had developed a rhythm with the kitchen that meant the dough went in at a certain time and came out at a certain time and was generally where it was supposed to be when it was supposed to be there. On Tuesday of the second week, she came in from the chicken shelter. She had reinforced the door because something was getting in at night, probably weasels, and she had addressed that with some extra boarding, to find that the bread she had set to rise was gone. Not the loaf. The dough. Gone from the bowl, which was sitting on the table, empty and scraped. Elowen stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Maisie was in the corner with her cloth doll. Tobin took it, she said without looking up. Elowen looked at the bowl. Where did he take it? Outside. She found him behind the barn. He had a fire going in the old stone pit that she had noticed earlier in the week, and he had shaped the dough, roughly, not well, and put it on a flat piece of iron over the flames. He heard her coming, and the set of his shoulders went defensive immediately, a boy bracing to be accused of something. Elowen looked at the iron, at the bread dough that was already going wrong on one side from uneven heat, at the fire, which was too big for what he was trying to do. It's burning on the bottom, she said. I know, Tobin said tightly. I was trying… He stopped. Trying what? A long pause. Papa's birthday is Friday, he said finally. Mama used to make him a special loaf, with rosemary in it, from the garden. He looked at the iron. I thought I could… I don't know what I was thinking. It's ruined. Elowen looked at the burned bottom of the dough. It's not completely ruined, she said. The top's still raw. We can cut the bottom off. Tobin stared at her. You're not… He stopped again. What? Angry, he said, like the word cost him something. It's bread dough, Elowen said. I can make more. That's not a problem. She crouched down beside the fire. Can I show you something about the heat? He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He stood there while she adjusted the fire, pulling some of the wood out, reducing the intensity, explaining without making a lesson out of it why too much heat from underneath did what it was doing to the bottom before the top had time to cook. She stayed out there with him for 20 minutes while they salvaged what they could. The bread was not good. It was salvageable, which was different. The rosemary's in the garden? Elowen asked when they were walking back. What's left of it? It's mostly gone to winter. There might be enough, she said, for a small loaf. I can show you how to do it properly if you want to try again before Friday. Tobin walked beside her. I was taller than she'd realized, almost her height already, which on a 13-year-old meant he was going to be a large person when he was done growing. Why are you helping me? He said. Elowen considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. Because you were trying to do something for your father, she said. And you didn't know how, and I do know how. That's all. He was quiet the rest of the way back to the house. But when she went to start the new dough that evening, she found that someone had already set out the flour and the salt and the mixing bowl on the counter. Not arranged particularly, just put there, roughly, The way a 13-year-old boy puts things somewhere when he's decided something without quite being willing to admit that he's decided it. Elowen picked up the flour and started measuring. The rosemary bread came out well. She made sure of it. Walked Tobin through each step on Thursday evening, let him do most of the actual work while she stayed close enough to catch mistakes before they became disasters. His hands were large for his age and initially too rough with the dough, so she showed him the motion, not by grabbing his hands, just by demonstrating beside him. And he watched and adjusted. When it came out of the oven Friday morning, properly browned, the rosemary smell filling the kitchen, Tobin stood in front of it with an expression that was not quite the closed-off expression he had been wearing for 2 weeks. Rourke came in for breakfast and stopped. "Where did that come from?" he said. Tobin was looking at the floor. "I made it," he said. "Miss Voss showed me." The silence in the kitchen was a different kind than the ones they'd been having. Rourke looked at the bread and then at his son, and then across the room at Elowen, who was doing something at the counter and not drawing any attention to herself. "It smells like your mother's," Rourke said. "I know," Tobin said. His voice was steady. He was working to keep it that way. "Thank you," Rourke said. He said it simply. He sat down. Elowen put his coffee in front of him and went back to the counter. The third week was when the first real trouble came, and it didn't come from the children or from Rourke or from the property. It came, like so much trouble does, from a direction nobody was looking. The horses were recovering. The 3 who had been showing respiratory symptoms had improved enough that Rourke had been able to assess them more clearly, and his assessment, which he shared with Elowen over dinner one evening in a tone that suggested he was still figuring out that she was actually interested, was that 2 of them were going to come through entirely fine, and the third, a 4-year-old roan he called Casper, was going to need a longer recovery and more careful feeding through the winter. "Casper's going to be worth something significant if he comes through right," Rourke said. He was eating the way he ate when he was thinking, not paying much attention to the food. "He's got the breeding for distance work. Buyers in the spring from the northern territories pay well for horses that can cover ground in hard conditions." "How much of your income this year depends on the spring buyers?" Elowen asked. Rourke looked up from his plate. Nobody had apparently asked him this before, or if they had, it wasn't recently. "A significant portion," he said. "How significant?" He set his fork down. "If the 4 best horses go at the prices I'm expecting, we're stable through the following winter with room to spare. If we lose even 2 of those 4, we're—" He stopped. "Tight," Elowen said. "Tight," he agreed. She looked at her plate. "Casper's getting better," she said. "I've been giving him the grain I dried from the saved portion of the stores, not the new grain, because the consistency's more uniform. He's eating it." Rourke stared at her. "You changed his feed." "Only that one, and only slightly. I mixed it with what you had. I should have asked you first." She meant that. "I'm sorry. It seemed urgent, and you were out." He kept staring at her for a moment. Not angrily, more like someone recalibrating something. "Is it helping?" he said. "He finished his bucket yesterday, both morning and evening, first time since I arrived." Another silence. "Don't apologize," Rourke said. He picked up his fork again. "You were right to do it." Elowen went back to her food. Maisie, who had been following this conversation with the serene interest of a child who knows something important is happening without entirely understanding what, said, "Can I name the new one? The little brown one that was born in the fall?" "I named the new one," Tobin said without looking up. "I named him 3 weeks ago." "What did you name him?" Maisie demanded. "Brick?" "That's a terrible name for a horse." "It's a fine name for a horse." "It is not—" "The horse is named Brick," Rourke said, in the tone of a man who has had this argument before and has decided to end it here. Maisie looked deeply unsatisfied with this outcome. She turned to Elowen. "Don't you think Brick is a terrible name?" "I think," Elowen said carefully, "that Brick is a memorable name." Maisie looked at her, said, "That's not the same as good." "No," Elowen agreed. "It's not." Tobin snorted. It was the first sound Elowen had heard from him that was close to a laugh. The trouble, when it arrived, came on a Wednesday afternoon when Rourke was out in the north field and Elowen was in the barn checking on Casper, and the 2 children were supposed to be inside doing their lessons. She heard the wagon before she saw it, a 2-horse rig, coming fast for a social call, which meant it wasn't exactly social. The man who climbed down from the wagon was broad and red-faced and wearing a coat that was significantly nicer than anything people in Raven Hollow generally wore on casual Wednesday afternoons. He looked at the barn, looked at the house, and then walked toward the barn specifically, which told Elowen he had seen her through the open door. "Looking for Halden," the man said. "He's out in the north field," Elowen said. The man looked her over with the particular assessment of someone deciding how much information to give. "You the woman who was supposed to marry Harker?" Elowen looked at him. "I'm the woman who works here," she said. "Can I take a message for Mr. Halden? Tell him Doyle Pemberton came by. Tell him I'm prepared to make an offer on his 4 horses, the breeding stock, the 4 he's been planning to take to the spring buyers." Elowen kept her expression neutral. "I'll tell him. Tell him my offer is fair, but it's time limited," Pemberton said. "I need to know before end of week." "I'll tell him." Pemberton didn't leave immediately. He stood in the barn doorway looking at the horses the way he'd looked at Elowen, assessing, calculating. "That roan's looking thin," he said, meaning Casper. "He's recovering," Elowen said. "From what?" "From being sick," she said. "He's getting better." Pemberton looked at her again, differently this time. "Sick horses sell for less," he said. "Something to consider." "Something for Mr. Halden to consider," Elowen said. "Yes. He'll be back by evening." Pemberton left. Elowen stood in the barn for a moment after the wagon had gone. She was thinking about the conversation at dinner 3 days ago, about spring buyers and tight winters and how much the 4 horses mattered. She was thinking about the particular timing of an offer that came now, midwinter, before spring, when a man with sick horses in a hard season might be more willing to accept a lower price than he would be in April when the horses were visibly well and buyers were competing. She went back to Casper and checked his water and stood there with her hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of him, watching him breathe. "You're going to be fine," she told him, not because she believed horses understood English, but because she believed that tone mattered, and because she meant it. When Rourke came in that evening, she told him about Pemberton. She told him exactly what had been said, word for word, because she had the kind of memory that did that automatically. She told him her impression of the visit, the timing, the comment about sick horses, the manufactured urgency. Rourke listened. He stood in the kitchen door in his coat, still cold from outside, listening with the particular quality of attention he had when something was actually important. "Pemberton's been trying to buy those horses for 2 seasons, he said. "Then he knows exactly what they're worth in spring," Elowen said. "Yes, he does." "So don't sell them in winter," Rourke looked at her across the kitchen. "It's not that simple. If the winter runs long and the stores—" "Show me the stores," Elowen said. "Tonight, after the children are down. Show me everything and let me look at it." He looked at her. "I'm not trying to manage your property," she said. "I'm trying to help you think through it. You can tell me no." "I wasn't going to tell you no," he said. They spent 2 hours that night going through everything, the grain stores, what was left after the contamination, the preserved food. Elowen had spent the last 3 weeks adding to the wood supply, the condition of the remaining livestock, what could be sold and what couldn't, and what they needed to get through to April. Elowen asked questions and Rourke answered them, and occasionally she did a calculation on the back of a piece of paper and showed it to him, and he looked at it and corrected one of her figures and she adjusted. At the end of it, she sat back and looked at the paper. "You don't have to sell to Pemberton," she said. "The margins are thin." "They're thin. They're not impossible." She looked at the numbers. "If you get through February without a major loss, you're in a position to wait for April. April buyers will pay more than Pemberton's offering right now, even accounting for a long winter." Rourke looked at the paper. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the fire had burned down considerably before he spoke. "You know," he said, "you haven't once asked me why I advertised for a bride." Elowen looked up. "My sister-in-law sent me the agency information," he said, "after my wife died. Said the kids needed a mother and I couldn't be both things at once. I wasn't sure she was wrong." He looked at the fire. "But that's not actually what I was looking for. I just didn't know how to say what I was actually looking for." "What were you looking for?" Elowen asked. He turned the paper with the numbers on it around so it was facing her. "This," he said. "Someone who could do this. Someone who could look at a problem and think through it without—" He stopped. "Without panicking," Elowen said. Without giving up, he said. She looked at the paper, at the numbers, at the cold kitchen with the fire burning down in it, and the house quiet around them with 2 children sleeping above. I'm going to tell Pemberton no, Rourke said. That's your decision, Elowen said. I know. I'm telling you what it is. She nodded once. She began gathering the papers. Elowen, he said. She looked up. Thank you. He said it the same way he'd said it to Tobin about the bread, simply without loading extra meaning onto it. Just the bare words, which were somehow heavier because of what they didn't add. It's what you're paying me for, she said. He looked at her for a moment. No, he said, it isn't. She didn't have an answer for that. She folded the papers and said goodnight and went to her room. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the cold room with the small stove ticking as it cooled, and she thought about a man who paid her wages and made her her own copy of a key and hadn't once looked at her the way Bram Harker had looked at her on that platform. She thought about a girl who had started sitting beside her in the kitchen, not because Elowen had invited her, but because it had started feeling like the right place to be. She thought about a boy who was learning to bake bread because he wanted to do something for his father and hadn't known how, and who had put the flour out on the counter without being asked. She thought about the numbers on the paper and the horses in the barn and the wall that Rourke had fixed the week before, the way the cold had stopped coming through the corner of the kitchen. She had arrived with 1 suitcase and $43 and no plan except surviving. She was doing more than surviving. She wasn't sure yet what to call what she was doing beyond that, but she knew, the way you know things when you stop arguing with them, that the unnamed feeling she'd woken up with that first morning was getting smaller, and something else was taking up the space it left. She wasn't ready to name that either. She turned off the lamp. Outside, the wind was picking up, that specific quality of wind that she recognized from the last few days, low and consistent, and from the north, the kind that meant it was pulling weather down from somewhere colder. She lay in the dark and listened to it, and she was asleep before she could finish deciding whether to be worried. What she didn't know, what none of them in the house knew yet, was that the wind picking up outside that night was the beginning of something that would change every calculation they had made and burn the careful plans down to something more basic than numbers on paper. What was coming was the kind of thing that showed you who people actually were, and it was coming fast. The wind she had fallen asleep listening to was different by 3 in the morning. Elowen woke to it before she understood why. That specific shift in sound, the way a house changes its voice when the pressure outside it changes. The small stove in her room had burned down to coals, and the cold had moved in to fill the corners, and she lay there for a moment in the dark, listening to what the wind was doing, and her body knew before her mind caught up. This wasn't regular winter wind. She got up. She pulled on her clothes in the dark the way she had learned to do in houses where you didn't light a lamp until you needed to. She went to the window and looked out and saw almost nothing, which was itself information, because there had been a moon 2 nights ago, and the paddock should have been visible. There was no paddock, there was no moon, there was only moving white, which meant the snow had already come down heavy enough to change the quality of the dark. She went to the kitchen. She built up the main fire without waking anyone. She was practiced at quiet. And she stood at the window over the basin and watched the white move across the yard and thought about the barn and the horses and the state of the roof on the east side, which Rourke had been meaning to reinforce and hadn't gotten to yet because there was always something more urgent. The east wall of the stable, specifically. She had walked past it twice in the last week and noticed the way the boards ran. Old timber, not rotten, but dried and contracted from years of temperature change. The kind that holds under ordinary winter weight, but has an argument with itself under extraordinary load. She had thought about mentioning it to Rourke. She had almost mentioned it twice. She had told herself it could wait until the weekend. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow and understood, with the cold clarity of a person who has always been better at facing things directly than at hoping they'll resolve themselves, that she had been wrong about the waiting. By 5 in the morning, the wind was loud enough to hear through the walls. Not a howl, something lower than a howl. More continuous, the kind of sound that indicates sustained force rather than gusting, which was worse in its own way because gusting at least gives a structure a moment to recover between blows. Rourke was up before 6. She heard him on the stairs, heard him go to the window in the main room, heard the specific quality of silence that follows when a man looks outside and understands the situation he's in. He came into the kitchen. "You're already up," he said. "I've been up for 3 hours." He looked at the fire, at the coffee she had ready, at her face, in that order. "How bad is it?" "I can't see the barn from here anymore," she said. "The snow's coming sideways. Wind's from the north-northwest, and it hasn't changed direction since I've been watching, which means it's not a front that's moving through. It's something that's sitting." Rourke took the coffee. He went to the window. He stood there for a moment, and Elowen watched him process what he was seeing, the way a man processes something he knew was possible but was hoping wouldn't be this. "The east wall," he said. "Yes," she said. He turned around. "I need to get out there." "I know." "The horses." "I know." She was already moving toward the hooks by the back door where the heavy coats hung. "Tell me what you need done in there, and I'll help." Rourke put his cup down. "You're not going out in this." Elowen looked at him, not argumentatively, just directly, the way she looked at him when she thought something needed to be clear. "Who else is going to go?" "Elowen, I'm not asking to run the operation," she said. "I'm asking you to tell me what to do so I can do it while you handle what only you can handle. That's all." He looked at her for a long moment. "The rope on the left hook," he said. "Take it out and tie it between the back door handle and the corner post of the barn. Keep it taut. If the visibility drops any further—" He stopped. "If it drops any further, you don't go outside without holding that rope. Do you understand?" "Yes." "I mean it." "I know you mean it," she said. "I'll do it." They got their coats and went out together into what the weather had decided to become. The cold hit her like a door swinging open. Not the deep-in-the-bones cold of a still winter morning, but something with force behind it, active, the kind of cold that moves and finds the gaps in your clothing and works its way into them with a specific malicious efficiency. The snow wasn't falling so much as being thrown, nearly horizontal in some gusts, swirling in confusing eddies in others, and within 30 seconds, Elowen's face was wet, and her eyelashes were working hard to stay clear. She kept her eyes on the shape of the barn, visible only as a dark mass 10 yards ahead of her, and she followed Rourke's back and didn't stop. Inside the barn, the wind was muffled but not gone. She could hear it working at the boards above her, testing them, and the horses knew. They always knew. There were 8 horses in the stable, and all 8 were restless in the specific way animals get restless when they understand something large is happening in the world outside, and cannot do anything about their position in it. Casper, who had been the calmest of the group over the last week, was moving in tight circles in his stall, head down. "He knows," Elowen said. "They all know." Rourke was already moving to the far end, checking the east wall stalls. "Get extra feed into the center stalls, the ones away from the east. If the wall goes, I want the horses that are farthest away from it." "Which ones do you want moved?" "Casper, Della, and the 2 Browns. Move them to the center." She did it. Moving horses in a storm wasn't simple. They were frightened and their fear was infectious, and they communicated it to each other in ways that made each individual animal harder to handle. But she moved carefully and kept her voice low and consistent, and got all 4 relocated in about 20 minutes while Rourke worked on bracing the east wall from the inside with what timber he could pull from the storage corner. "This isn't going to hold under heavy load," he said, without turning from what he was doing. He was hammering a brace beam into place against the lower section of the wall, and his voice had the particular quality of someone who is assessing out loud rather than expecting an answer. "How much snow does it take?" Elowen asked. "On a wall this age?" He hit the brace again. "Depends on the wind packing it. Could be a few hours. Could be faster if the wind shifts and pushes it direct." Elowen looked at the roof. She looked at the angle of the wall. She was calculating, the way she calculated everything, from available information toward a most likely outcome. "The center section is newer than the ends," she said. "Rebuilt it 2 years ago. So if the east end goes, the center should hold." "Should," he said, "not will." They worked in the barn for an hour. By the time they went back in to check on the children, Maisie was awake and frightened and sitting at the top of the stairs. Tobin was up and dressed, and had, without being asked, brought in extra firewood and stacked it by the kitchen hearth. The storm had intensified. Tobin looked at them when they came in. He looked at his father's face, the particular reading that a child does of a parent's expression when they're trying to determine how worried to be. "Is it bad?" he asked. "It's manageable," Rourke said. He said it in the tone of a man who is not certain of that yet, but has decided that certain is not the standard he needs to meet right now. Stay inside, both of you. Maisie. He looked at his daughter on the stairs. Come down and eat something. Miss Voss is going to make breakfast. I'm not hungry, Maisie said. You don't have to be hungry to eat, Elowen said. Come down. Maisie came down. They ate breakfast with the wind against the walls and the storm sitting on top of the house, and nobody saying much. Tobin ate fast, the way he ate when his mind was somewhere else. Maisie kept looking at the window. Rourke was gone again halfway through the meal. Back out to the barn. She heard the back door. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the light outside was the color of pewter. At 11, it was barely lighter than early evening. Elowen kept the kitchen fire going and kept herself occupied with things that needed doing. Mending, organizing the remaining stores, checking and rechecking the pantry inventory she had been building in her head for 3 weeks. And she kept one part of her attention on the barn the entire time, the way you keep one part of your attention on a person you're worried about. She was watching from the kitchen window at 20 minutes past 11 when she saw it. The east end of the stable shifted. Not collapsed, not yet. Shifted. A visible change in the angle of the roofline, the top of the east wall giving an inch or two inward under the weight of what had been packing against it for hours. She watched it for 3 seconds to confirm she wasn't misreading it in the poor light. She wasn't. She was already moving. Tobin, she said, not loudly. He was at the kitchen table with the wood horse he had been carving, which he had apparently brought down at some point while she wasn't watching. He looked up. Go upstairs with your sister and stay there. Don't come down until your father or I tell you. Do you understand? His face changed. What's happening? The barn wall. Go. She did not wait to see if he went. She was already putting on her coat. Outside was worse than it had been at 6 in the morning. The wind was coming from a slightly different angle now. Not fully shifted, but enough. And it had found the gap between the house and the barn that the rope she had strung earlier was crossing, and the rope was doing what she had hoped it would do, which was be exactly where she had left it, and exactly as taught. She grabbed it with both hands and went. The barn doors were on the west side, away from the damaged wall. Rourke had them latched from the inside. She banged on them with her fist 3 times, and they opened in 20 seconds. And Rourke's face in the gap had that particular controlled look of a man who is managing something very close to the edge. The wall? She said. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe less. I've got 4 horses I haven't been able to move yet. They're in the east stalls and they're panicking. I can't get them to lead. Which 4? 4. The 2 mares in the last stalls, and Pepper and the gray. Elowen pulled the barn door open wider and went inside. The east end of the stable was audible now. A low, creaking groan that wasn't dramatic but was steady, which meant the stress on the structure had passed the point of intermittent and was now continuous. The 2 mares in the last stalls were against the back walls of their enclosures, whites of their eyes visible, not willing to come forward to the gate. Rourke had Pepper's halter, but the horse was pulling backward against him, and the gray wasn't even haltered. Elowen went past Rourke to the last stall on the east end. She put her back to the wall beside the mare's stall gate. Not facing the horse directly, not reaching for her, just being there, close, in the animal's periphery, taking up space in a way that was present without being threatening. She kept her voice below the sound of the wind. Easy, she said. Easy. I know it's loud. The mare's ears tracked to her. Easy, Elowen said again. She reached up slowly, not toward the horse, toward the gate latch, and she got it open and stood in the opening and did not move and kept talking, low and continuous, nothing specific, just sound, just presence. It took 2 minutes. Later, it felt like 20. The mare moved toward her, not easily, sidling, head high, each step a negotiation. And then she was out of the stall, and Elowen had her halter and was walking, not running, back toward the center stalls where the relocated horses were. Rourke got the second mare while Elowen was settling the first. He had to drag her more than led her, but he got her out. Pepper followed once he had the second mare moving. Herd instinct, the tendency to go where the others go, rather than be left alone with the sound in the wall. The gray was last and was the problem. The gray was a 4-year-old that had been skittish since she was born, according to Rourke, and was making that disposition known now in the full force of a collapsing stable in a blizzard. She had gotten her halter line caught on the stall latch somehow in her panic, and Rourke was working on untangling it with hands that were stiff from cold, the horse pulling against him and the wall above them making a sound that had changed quality. Elowen heard the change in the sound. "Rourke," she said. "I know," he said. He was pulling at the tangled line. "Rourke, I'm getting it." The groan in the wall went up in pitch for 1 second, and then the east end of the roof came in. Not the whole east end. The northwest corner of the east section, the oldest piece of timber in the structure, the part that had been carrying the edge load, buckled, and 2 roof beams came down on the east wall side, and the east wall went outward instead of inward, which was the best possible direction in the worst possible moment. Snow and debris and cold air and a sound Elowen felt in her chest rather than heard came down on the far end of the barn. The gray horse screamed. Rourke went down, not under the falling section. He was far enough from the east end that the direct collapse missed him. But the shock wave of the fall, the sudden pressure change, and the roar and the gray horse throwing herself backward all at once. He lost his footing on the hay-covered floor and went down hard, and the gray's hooves came down twice in the space where he was. The second hoof caught his left arm. Elowen heard him make a sound that was not a word. She was across the barn in seconds. The gray was loose now. The line had broken in the panic, and the horse was bolting for the open barn door, which was still unlatched from when Elowen had come in. She let the horse go. She went to Rourke. I was already trying to get up. That was the first thing she noticed. He was already trying to get up, which was consistent with everything she knew about him in 3 weeks, but was also not necessarily the right choice. "Wait," she said. She got down beside him. "Wait. Let me look." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your arm." "I'm fine," he said again, and he was already on his feet, which, she had to grant him, suggested that fine was closer to accurate than she had initially assessed. He was holding his left arm against his body, the hand cradling the elbow, and his face was a color that was not healthy, but was not the gray of a man about to collapse. "Can you move the fingers?" she said. He tried. "Yes?" "Then it's probably not broken, might be cracked. We need to get inside." She looked at the collapsed section of roof. Debris and snow and 2 beams down. The east stalls completely buried, the horses who had been in them now loose in the middle of the barn with her. The structure of the center and west sections appeared intact. "The center will hold," she said. "The horses can stay here for now." "The gray got out," Rourke said. "I know. She went for the door. She'll shelter somewhere." "She won't. She'll panic and run, and in this—" He started for the door. "Rourke." She grabbed his good arm. "You cannot go out after a frightened horse in this. You can't see 20 feet. She'll die out there." "She might." Elowen held his arm. "I know that. I know what she's worth. But you go out there right now, and you might not come back either, and those 2 children in that house need their father more than you need 1 horse." The words landed. She could see them land, not because he argued, but because he stopped, and stopping, for a man like Rourke in a moment like this, was the thing that cost something. He stood in the barn door with his good arm against the frame, and the storm outside, and his left arm held against his body, and he breathed. "All right," he said. They went back inside. Getting back to the house along the rope was harder now. The wind had intensified again in the last 20 minutes, and the snow was thick enough that Elowen had to stay in physical contact with the rope the whole way, one hand on it, pulling herself toward the house. Rourke was behind her, and she was aware of him the entire time, aware of his breathing and his pace, and whether he was keeping up, and he was, which was what mattered. The back door opened into the kitchen and warmth and the smell of the fire she had left going. Tobin was not upstairs. I was standing in the middle of the kitchen with his coat on. Elowen stopped. "I told you to stay up." "Where's Papa?" Tobin said. His voice was very controlled for a 13-year-old in the situation he was in, which told her he had been standing here for a while holding himself together. "Right here," Rourke said, coming through the door behind her. Tobin's face did something complicated. He looked at his father and then at his father's arm, and then he did the same thing Elowen had done, the quick assessment, the reading of damage, the calculation of severity. "What happened?" he said. "Roof came in on the east end. I'm all right." "You're holding your arm." "I'm all right, Tobin." Tobin looked at Elowen, like he was checking her answer against his father's. "The arm needs to be wrapped," Elowen said. "He's going to be sore, but he's functional." "Where's Maisie?" "Upstairs. She was scared. I didn't want her to come down." Elowen took off her coat. That was the right call, she said. Thank you. She sat Rourke at the kitchen table and took off his coat with more care than usual. He let her, which itself was a measure of the fact that the arm was more painful than he was saying, and she examined it as well as she could with cold, stiff fingers. The muscle above the elbow was already swelling and would be an impressive bruise by tomorrow. Nothing was protruding that shouldn't protrude. The fingers moved, which remained the key information. She wrapped it in strips of cloth from the mending basket, tight, not too tight, supported, and she moved his arm into a position that held the elbow at the angle where he said it hurt less, and she told him to keep it there. I need to go look at the horses again, he said. In 20 minutes, she said. Drink that first. She put the cup of coffee in his right hand. The barn isn't going anywhere that it isn't already going. He drank. Tobin sat down across from his father and was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. This was the quiet of someone who had been alone in a kitchen for 40 minutes, wondering if the people who had gone outside were going to come back, and who now had them back and was not entirely sure how to process the relief. Rourke looked at his son. You kept the fire going, he said. You were out there a long time, Tobin said. The east section came down, Rourke said. We got all the horses out first. Tobin absorbed this. All of them? Rourke glanced at Elowen. We lost the gray, Elowen said. She bolted in the panic. She got out through the barn door before we could stop her. Tobin looked down at the table. The gray was not his horse. None of them were technically his. But she was the one who had been born here. The one Tobin had watched enter the world 3 years ago in a March that had been warmer than this December. He knew her name and her habits and the way she turned her head when you brought the morning feed. Elowen sat down at the table. She didn't say anything about the gray. Sometimes the thing a person needs is just to sit with someone who knows what was lost. And Elowen understood that you couldn't fix that particular kind of grief with words. They sat. Upstairs, Maisie's footsteps crossed the floor. The storm outside said what it had to say, which was still considerable. At some point, Rourke fell asleep at the table, sitting up, his right arm on the table, and his head dropped toward it, the way a person falls asleep when they have been operating on adrenaline for 6 hours, and the moment of stillness is the first opening the body has found. Tobin saw it happen and looked at Elowen, and Elowen stood up and got the blanket from the back of the chair near the fireplace, the one Maisie usually sat in, and put it around Rourke's shoulders without waking him. She looked at Tobin. She tilted her head toward the hallway, meaning, come out here so we don't wake him. Tobin followed her into the narrow hallway off the kitchen. The gray, he said. I know, Elowen said. She doesn't know how to... He stopped, started again. She spooks easy. In open country in this, she'll run until she falls. There's a chance she found the fence line and followed it, Elowen said. She believed this was possible. She also understood it was less than certain, and Tobin was 13 years old and not a fool. When the storm breaks, we look. That's all we can do right now. Tobin looked at the floor. His jaw was working in the way she had come to recognize. The thing he did when he was trying to decide whether he was going to be angry or sad. Like those two things were competing, and he was waiting to see which one won. When we first moved here, he said, when I was about 10, we had a winter that killed 3 horses and 2 of the chickens and the cow. Papa said it was the worst winter in 15 years. He looked up at Elowen. He didn't sleep for 4 days. He just kept going out and coming back and going out. He loves this place, Elowen said. He loves us, Tobin said. Like that was the correction that mattered. The place is just, it's where we are. The horses are just how we stay here. He looked back at the floor. After Mama died, I thought... He stopped again. Elowen waited. I thought he was going to give up, Tobin said. The place. Us. All of it. He got so quiet. He stopped talking at dinner. He'd just sit there. He picked at a loose thread on his cuff. He never gave up. But for a while, I wasn't sure. Elowen looked at this boy in the narrow hallway, this 13-year-old who had spent the last year and a half being terrified that the last anchor he had left was going to let go of the rope. And she understood, with the particular clarity of someone who had spent her own childhood watching for exits, exactly what those 18 months had cost him. He's not giving up, she said. I know. Tobin said it quickly, like he didn't want her to think he was still worried about it. I know that now. Good, Elowen said, because he needs you to know that. Tobin looked at her. He sees you watching him, she said. Parents always see that. And knowing you believe in him, that does something for him. More than he'll probably ever say. Tobin was quiet for a moment. Did your father ever... He stopped. Sorry, that's... My father died when I was 9, Elowen said. She said it plainly, the way she said most difficult things. Not trying to soften it, just putting it out where it could be a fact rather than a secret. My mother 3 years after that. I had an aunt who took me in, but she had 5 children of her own and I was the extra one, which I learned to be useful fast. Tobin looked at her with the particular attention of a young person being told something true about an adult, which doesn't happen often enough that they stop noticing when it does. Is that why you know how to do so many things? He said. Mostly, she said. Also, I paid attention. He almost smiled, not quite. Get some sleep, Elowen said. I'll watch the fire. You've been up since 3 in the morning. She blinked. He had no way of knowing that. She hadn't told anyone when she'd woken up. He had figured it from something, some detail, the way he figured most things when he was paying attention. I'll manage, she said. He went upstairs. She heard him stop at the top, probably checking on Maisie, and then crossed to his own room. She went back to the kitchen. Rourke was still asleep at the table. She put more wood on the fire and pulled the chair from the corner and sat where she could see both the fire and the window. The storm was doing something different now. Still present, still forceful, but the quality of it had changed in a way she recognized. Not weaker exactly, but less continuous. More intermittent. The kind of change that meant the worst of it had passed, and what was left was the aftermath, which was still serious, but was the kind of serious you could move through rather than the kind you had to wait out. She thought about the gray. She thought about the east end of the barn, the collapsed section, the horses crowded into the center stalls, the debris buried under 3 feet of storm snow that was still coming down but no longer being thrown. She thought about what it would take to rebuild in spring and what it would cost and how that intersected with the spring buyers, and what she knew about timber work and what she didn't, and what Tobin had said about learning to be a carpenter. She thought about Rourke's arm, and how he was going to try to go back out too early tomorrow, and how she was going to need to be specific and direct about why that was a problem. She thought about Maisie upstairs, asleep probably now, the way children eventually sleep no matter what's happening around them. She thought about a lot of things in that kitchen in the dark, with the storm finishing its business outside, and the man asleep at the table, and the fire holding the cold back from the center of the room. She was still in the chair, still watching the window, when the dark outside began to lighten. Very slowly, in the way of a winter morning after a storm, tentative, gray-white, offering the information that the night was over without committing to much more than that. Rourke woke with a sharp intake of breath, the kind of waking when your body has registered a problem in your sleep that your mind needs to catch up to. He sat up and looked around the kitchen and looked at his arm and looked at Elowen in the chair. You stayed up, he said. Someone had to watch the fire. Elowen. The storm's breaking, she said. The wind changed around 4. There's still snow coming down, but it's different. By mid-morning, we should be able to go out and assess. He looked at her. His hair was disheveled from the table, and his face had the particular look of a man who has slept 3 hours after a very long day and knows that what's ahead of him is going to require more than 3 hours' worth of restored energy. I need to look for the gray, he said. We both do, she said. After we've assessed the stable, and after you've eaten something, and after it's light enough to actually see. In that order. He would have argued with most people. She could see him consider arguing with her and then set it aside, which she suspected had less to do with the logic of her sequence and more to do with the fact that, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, he had developed a habit of trust that hadn't fully announced itself until just now. All right, he said. Elowen got up and went to the stove. When Maisie came downstairs an hour later, she found her father at the table with his arm wrapped and his coffee in his right hand, and Elowen at the stove making the morning's first biscuits with honey on top, the jar from the left cupboard with the red cloth, which she had asked about weeks ago and remembered, and Tobin at the window watching the sky, which had gone from gray-white to something slightly warmer. Maisie looked at all of it. She looked at the window and the lightening sky outside it. She looked at her father's arm. Papa, she said. I'm all right, he said. She went to him anyway and put her arms around him from behind, which was difficult given the arm situation, and he lifted his right arm and held her there. He looked at Elowen over the top of Maisie's head. Elowen looked back at him. Then she looked at the biscuits. "Almost ready," she said. 2 hours later, when the snow had come down enough that you could walk through it if you were willing to work at it, Elowen went back to the barn with Rourke to look at the damage in actual daylight. It was as bad as she had understood it to be in the dark, and worse, in two ways she hadn't been able to assess. The east wall had taken out a section of the connecting fence on its way down, and the debris field was larger than the collapse had sounded. The center section of the barn stood. The 6 horses who had been relocated the night before were crowded and nervous but alive. They stood at the edge of the collapsed section and looked at it. "Spring project," Rourke said finally. "Yes," Elowen said. "Bigger than I wanted to tackle in one season." "Yes," she said again. "It's going to be expensive." "I know." She looked at the debris, at the collapsed timber, at what it was going to take to clear it, let alone rebuild. "But you have 6 horses." He looked at her. 6 healthy horses," she said. "The buyers are still coming in April. That math still works." He looked back at the collapsed east end. "Casper's in the center section," he said. "Casper's in the center section," she confirmed. "He ate this morning, both buckets." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "The Gray's tracks go east," Tobin called from the far side of the barn. He had come out with them and gone around the perimeter without saying anything about it, and he was standing now at the east fence line, looking down. "They go east, and then they follow the fence." Rourke moved. Elowen moved with him. The tracks were there, nearly filled in, but there, the shape of them still legible in the new snow, the Gray's particular stride pattern that Tobin apparently knew well enough to recognize. "The fence line goes east for about a quarter mile before it turns south," Rourke said. "And south it hits the Magruder property," Tobin said. Rourke looked at the tracks. "Magruder's got a covered shelter on the south edge of his land, a lean-to where he keeps equipment." They both looked at the tracks, at the direction they went. "I'll take the other horse," Tobin said. "You will not," Rourke said. "Papa, I'll go," Rourke said. He looked at his arm. He looked at Tobin. Something passed between them that Elowen watched without interjecting. The specific negotiation between a father who knows he's limited and a son who knows it too and is trying to be useful in a way that might not go well. "I'll go," Elowen said. Both of them looked at her. "I can ride," she said, "and my arm works." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. "The Gray doesn't know you." "The Gray is cold and alone and scared," Elowen said. "At this point she doesn't care much who comes for her." It was Tobin who settled it, which was perhaps the most surprising thing about that morning. He looked at his father and said quietly, "Let her go, Papa." Rourke looked at his son. He looked at Elowen. "Take the bay," he said. "She's steadier. And take the rope from the back hook." Elowen took the bay and she took the rope and she went east along the fence line, following the Gray's nearly erased tracks with the morning light coming through the lifted storm in long pale lines across the snow, and the cold still present but no longer moving, no longer pressing, just there the way winter is simply there. She found the Gray at the Magruder lean-to. The horse was standing in the back of it, facing the wall, and she was shaking, fine, all over trembling, the kind that comes from cold and fear and a very long night of both. And when Elowen came into the lean-to, she turned and looked, and her eyes were still showing some white, but she didn't move away. Elowen dismounted. She stood still in the entrance for a minute, just breathing, just being there. Then she walked slowly toward the horse, talking the whole way, low and even. Nothing in particular, just the sound of someone present and not threatening. And the Gray let her come close. And when Elowen put her hand on the animal's neck, the shaking didn't stop. But something in the horse's stance changed, just slightly. The difference between alone in the cold and not quite alone anymore. "There you are," Elowen said. "There you are." She got the rope on her and led both horses back along the fence line toward the Halden homestead, where the smoke from the kitchen chimney was visible from half a mile away. A straight dark line going up into a sky that had finally decided to stop pressing down and let a little light through. She watched that smoke the whole way back. She was cold and tired, and her eyes were aching from the brightness of the snow, and she had been awake for something close to 18 hours. And she walked back through the field with 2 horses behind her, and the cold in her bones, and she thought about Maisie's arms around her father's neck, and Tobin's tracks in the snow around the barn's perimeter. How he had gone without saying anything, just done it, and she thought about Rourke's face when he'd said let her go and had meant it. She was still not ready to name what was happening in that house. But she was, she realized, walking toward it. Not away from it. Toward it, on purpose. In the cold. With 2 horses. Because that was where she needed to be. And for the first time in longer than she could immediately account for, that feeling, the feeling of moving toward something rather than away from something, sat in her chest the way warmth sits, the way a fire you've built yourself sits, with the particular satisfaction of a thing you made happen. The gray followed her all the way home. The gray came back thin but alive, and that fact alone carried the Halden homestead through the rest of December on something that wasn't quite hope, but was close enough to function like it. Rourke's arm healed the way physical things heal when the person attached to them refuses to give them adequate rest. Slowly, with complaint, the bruising going through 4 different colors over 2 weeks before settling into something that looked almost normal. Elowen wrapped it every morning and said nothing about the fact that he was using it before he should have been, because saying something would have accomplished nothing, and she had learned early which battles with this man were worth having and which ones were simply the weather. The east section of the barn remained collapsed through January. There was no rebuilding it in those temperatures, and they all understood that, and what they did instead was adapt. The 6 remaining horses crowded into the center and west sections, routines adjusted, extra bedding, careful feeding. It was more work than before. Everything was more work than before. But the horses were eating and the horses were well, and Casper, who had been the most fragile of them coming into the winter, was by January's 2nd week showing the particular bright-eyed quality that indicated an animal who had decided it was going to be fine. "He's going to be something in April," Rourke said one evening, watching Casper through the stall gate. "He's already something," Elowen said. Rourke glanced at her sideways. He did that more now. That sideways glance, quick, like he was checking something. She had started noticing it and had decided not to have an opinion about it yet. January moved the way January moves in hard country. Slowly, without mercy, every day a negotiation between what you needed to accomplish and what the cold would permit. But the homestead held. The stores Elowen had organized and supplemented in December held. The wood supply, which Tobin had taken personal responsibility for, held. The 3 of them, 4, counting Maisie, who had taken on the egg gathering and the feeding of the remaining chickens, with a seriousness that would have been funny if it hadn't also been genuinely helpful, had settled into a rhythm that was not effortless but was functional. Raven Hollow, meanwhile, had not stopped talking. Small settlements don't, particularly in winter when there's not much else to do. And the story of the woman who had arrived as Bram Harker's rejected bride and ended up in the home of the widower Rourke Halden was exactly the kind of story that a settlement like Raven Hollow could sustain itself on through the cold months. Elowen heard versions of it second and third hand. Mavis from the dry goods store, who had become something close to an ally, passed along what she thought Elowen should know in the brisk, information-forward way that Elowen appreciated. "They're saying you've got Rourke wrapped around your finger," Mavis said, on a supply run in mid-January, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone reporting bad weather. "That you maneuvered yourself into the household and you're working toward getting your hands on the property." "I'm working toward getting enough food stored to last through February," Elowen said. "That's all I'm working toward." "I know that," Mavis said. "I'm telling you what they're saying." "Who's saying it?" Mavis was quiet for a moment in the specific way of someone deciding how much detail was useful. "Calvert's wife, mostly," she said, "and a few of the women who take their cues from her." A pause. "And Bram Harker has been talking." Elowen looked up from the list she was checking. "Bram's still in town." "He was gone for 2 months, came back after Christmas." Mavis straightened a row of canned goods with more attention than they required. "He's been at the saloon telling people you tricked him, that there was something wrong with the original arrangement that was your doing, not his." Elowen looked at the list. She made herself continue reading it. "People who were on that platform know what happened," she said. "They do," Mavis agreed. "Doesn't stop Bram from talking." Elowen bought what she needed and went back to the wagon and sat on the bench in the cold for a moment before she picked up the reins. She thought about Bram Harker's flat voice on a platform in November. She thought about the envelope he'd set down between them like a settled bill. She thought about how thoroughly she had not thought about him in the 6 weeks since, how completely he had become irrelevant to her actual daily life, and how irritating it was that he apparently had not extended the same courtesy to her. She picked up the reins and went home. She did not tell Rourke what Mavis had said. Not immediately. She told herself it was because it didn't matter, and that was true. But she was honest enough with herself to also recognize that she didn't want to bring Bram Harker into the kitchen at the Halden homestead, didn't want his name in that space, didn't want Rourke's face to do whatever it would do when he heard it. What she didn't account for was that Raven Hollow was a small place, and Rourke Halden went into town on his own. He came back from a supply run in the 3rd week of January, and he came in through the back door with the particular quality of stillness around him that she had learned to read as controlled anger. Not explosive, just compressed, the way a man holds something that would otherwise be loud if he let it out in front of his children. The children were occupied. Maisie was upstairs. Tobin was in the barn. Rourke came into the kitchen and looked at Elowen and said, "Bram Harker told 3 men at the saloon last night that you came here with the intention of securing yourself a better arrangement than the one you'd originally negotiated." Elowen put down what she was holding. "I know he's been talking." "You knew." "Mavis told me 2 weeks ago. I didn't tell you because it doesn't change anything." Rourke looked at her. "It changes what people think about you, in this town." "People in this town were already thinking things about me," she said. "That's been true since I stepped off the train." "Elowen, what would you like me to do about it?" She asked it genuinely, not sharply. "I can't make Bram Harker tell the truth. I can't make people stop talking. All I can do is what I'm doing." "What you're doing," Rourke said, and then stopped, like the sentence had more to it that he wasn't sure how to finish. "What?" she said. He looked at the floor for a moment. "What you're doing is, you've kept this place going through a winter that would have broken it," he said. "You found the contaminated grain. You helped me save the horses. You got the gray back." He looked up. "And people in this town are talking about you like you're some kind of, like you're here for what you can take." His jaw was tight. "It's wrong." "Yes," Elowen said. "It is. I want to do something about it. You can't make people—" "I'm not talking about people," he said. "I'm talking about Bram specifically." He crossed his arms. The left one was almost fully healed now, mostly. "He made an agreement with you. He broke it publicly, in a way that left you stranded with no resources and nowhere to go, in winter, in a town you didn't know. And now he's coming back and rewriting what he did to make himself look less like what he is." A pause. "That's not right." Elowen looked at him. She thought about the platform. She thought about the envelope on the rail and how she had not picked it up, and how that decision had been the right one even though it had been terrifying. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm going to do something." She should have known from the way he said it, level, deliberate, the tone of a man who has made a decision and is telling you about it, not asking your permission, that whatever he was planning was going to be larger than a conversation. Rourke didn't talk about things he wasn't going to do. February came. The horses continued to recover. Tobin spent 2 afternoons a week in the barn with his father now, learning the specifics of horse care that went beyond what he'd absorbed by proximity. The evaluation of leg condition, the particular signs of respiratory health or its absence, the way breeding stock needed to be conditioned through winter if it was going to show well in spring. Rourke taught the way he did everything else, without ceremony, just information delivered directly, assuming the student was paying attention. Tobin was always paying attention. Elowen watched this from the margins and felt something she didn't try to name, something about what it looked like when a man made space in what he was doing to pull his son into it. The difference between that and the kind of fathering that kept everything separate and private. Maisie had taken to sitting beside Elowen in the evenings with her cloth doll and a small length of fabric that she was attempting to sew into a dress for the doll. Her stitches were uneven and she pulled the thread too tight consistently, which gathered the fabric in ways she didn't intend. "Like this," Elowen said one evening, demonstrating the tension. "How loose was right, the way your hand had to relax." "You don't have to fight it. The needle does the work." Maisie tried again, slightly better. She held it up and examined it with the severe critical eye she applied to most things. "It's still crooked," she said. "It's better than it was," Elowen said. "I want it to be good." "You want it to be good now," Elowen said. "It's going to be good later. First it has to be better. That's how it works." Maisie considered this with the philosophical weight of a 7-year-old applying new information to her understanding of the world. Tobin's horse carving is better now, she said. It is, Elowen agreed, because he kept working on it. He's on his third one, Maisie said. He gave the first one to Papa. Elowen hadn't known that. She filed it where she filed other things she noticed but didn't comment on. What did your papa think of it? He put it on the shelf above the fireplace, Maisie said. The one where Mama's picture is. She kept her eyes on her sewing. He said Tobin did a good job. Elowen looked at the fire. She thought about that shelf. She had been in the main room enough times to know which shelf it was, and she had noticed the photograph of a woman in a dark frame, and she had not looked at it more than once because it was not something she was supposed to have opinions about. Your papa loved your mama very much, Elowen said. I know, Maisie said. Tobin remembers her more than me. I was only 4. She was quiet for a moment, chewing with her tongue slightly between her teeth from concentration. I remember she smelled like the rosemary from the garden, and she sang when she was working. Another pause. Do you sing? Not while I'm working, Elowen said. I can't carry a tune and work at the same time. Maisie accepted this. Can you sing at all? Badly, Elowen said. Maisie appeared to find this funny. She ducked her head to hide it, which was a gesture Elowen had come to recognize as the thing Maisie did when she was delighted by something, and wasn't sure if she was allowed to show it. She was working on that, on the allowedness of things. They sewed together for another hour. The second week of February, Rourke rode into town on a Wednesday. Not a supply day. Not the day he typically went. He went alone, in the morning, and told Elowen he would be back by afternoon. She didn't ask. She had learned the difference between things that were her business and things that were his, and she respected that line the same way she had asked him to respect the lock on her door in the beginning. He was back by 2 o'clock. He came in and sat down at the kitchen table and put a folded piece of paper in front of him and looked at it for a moment and then looked at her. I want to tell you what I did, he said, before you hear it somewhere else. Elowen sat down across from him. I went to see Pemberton, he said. She waited. Not about the horses. I told him the horses aren't for sale. Rourke looked at the paper. Pemberton keeps records. Business records, transaction records, anything that moves money in this territory. He's not honest in all the ways a man should be honest, but he's meticulous, and he knows what things are worth. He unfolded the paper. He had the original agency agreement on file, the one Harker filed through the land office when he arranged for you to come. The itemized expenses, the agency fee, the travel arrangements, what Harker paid to the letter service. Rourke pushed the paper toward her. Everything Bram Harker spent to arrange for you to come here. Elowen looked at the paper, at the numbers on it. She understood what she was looking at, a ledger. What Bram had spent. What Bram had offered her on the platform in that envelope, which she had not taken. What Bram had been holding over the arrangement as the cost, the investment, the thing that gave him some claim. She looked up at Rourke. I paid it, he said. She stared at him. I went to the bank this morning and I took out what I've been putting aside for the Carver grazing land. The expansion I've been working toward for 3 years. He said it plainly, without drama. I paid every dollar Bram Harker spent arranging your travel to this territory. I had Pemberton draw up documentation, witnessed. Elowen opened her mouth and closed it. The grazing land isn't going anywhere, Rourke said, before she could find words. Carver's not selling to anyone else this season. I can rebuild that money by fall if the spring buyers come through the way I think they will. He looked at his hands on the table. What I couldn't... He stopped. Started again. I couldn't keep letting him use that arrangement as something that tied you here without your choosing, or as something he could hold over you, or as a reason for people to say you owed him anything. He looked up at her. You don't owe him anything. Rourke, she said. Her voice came out differently than she intended, less certain. I'm not purchasing anything, he said immediately. That's not... I need to be clear about that. I'm settling a debt so that nobody else can use it as a claim on you. What you do after that is entirely your decision. You can stay through spring like we agreed. You can leave tomorrow. You can... He stopped. Whatever you decide, it will be your decision, with no obligation attached. Elowen looked at the paper, at the numbers, at the years of savings it represented. You can't afford this, she said. I made the calculation, he said. Rourke, Elowen. He said her name in the particular way he said it when he meant her to hear it as the end of an argument, not the continuation of one. I made the calculation. The horses in spring cover the shortfall. The wall rebuild can happen in stages through summer. The grazing land can wait a year. He looked at her steadily. This couldn't wait. She sat with that for a moment. With what it meant that a man had looked at several years of work and decided that her freedom from a debt she hadn't even incurred was worth more. When? She said. Tomorrow morning, he said. I'm going to town. I'm going to find Bram Harker, and I'm going to give him what Pemberton drew up, and I'm going to tell him in front of whoever's there to hear it that his claim is settled, that there's nothing outstanding, and that he should take the money and go. He looked at her. I thought you should know before I did it. You're not asking my permission, she said. No, he said. But it concerns you. You should know. Elowen looked at the fire. She thought about Bram on that platform. The flat voice, the envelope, the assessment. She thought about the way Rourke looked at her, which was not that, which was nothing like that. Will you let me come? She said. Rourke looked at her. I'm not asking to fight your battle, she said. I'm asking to stand there, to be present. She met his eyes. He rejected me in front of this town. I want them to see me standing there when it's finished. Something shifted in Rourke's expression. Not softness exactly. Something more like recognition. Yes, he said. All right. The next morning was cold and clear, the way mornings in February sometimes are after a sustained cold stretch. The sky above Raven Hollow, a sharp pale blue, and the snow from the last weeks packed hard underfoot, catching the early light and throwing it back. They left Tobin and Maisie at home. Tobin understood something was happening without being told exactly what, and he accepted this with the equanimity of a boy who had gotten better at trusting that the adults in his house were handling things. Maisie made Rourke promise to bring her something from the dry goods store and kissed him on the cheek and went back inside. Elowen and Rourke drove into Raven Hollow on the same bench where she had first ridden with him 3 months ago, in the opposite direction, and the town was doing what a small town does in the middle of a weekday February morning. A few wagons, a few people moving between buildings, the particular slow rhythm of a settlement in the deepest part of winter. Bram Harker was not hard to find. He kept a room at the boarding house on the far end of the main street, and he was coming out of it when Rourke pulled the wagon up, as if the timing had been arranged, which it hadn't. It was just the particular coincidence that tends to happen in small places when something is about to occur. Bram saw Rourke first. Then he saw Elowen. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, because Elowen didn't think guilt was a thing Bram Harker experienced in any straightforward way. More like recalculation. The expression of a man rapidly assessing a situation and deciding what posture to take. He chose belligerence, which told Elowen he had decided he still had the stronger position. That told her in turn that he hadn't yet understood what was happening. Halden, he said. He didn't acknowledge Elowen. Bram. Rourke climbed down from the wagon. He had the folded documents from Pemberton in his coat. He didn't reach for them yet. I heard you've been talking. I've been talking to my own business, Bram said. Your business keeps becoming other people's business, Rourke said. That's the problem. By this time, 3 or 4 people had found reasons to be in the immediate vicinity. The street, the storefront 2 doors down, the window of the dry goods store where Mavis had appeared with an expression of contained attention. Raven Hollow had an instinct for moments, and the instinct was functioning. Whatever she's told you about the arrangement, Bram started. She hasn't told me anything about the arrangement, Rourke said. I know about the arrangement because I've spent the last 3 months watching what kind of woman she is, and then I went to Pemberton and I looked at the numbers. He reached into his coat and produced the documents. Here's what you spent. Agency fees, travel arrangements, the letter service. Every dollar, documented, with Pemberton's witness. He held it out. Bram looked at the papers. What is this? Payment, Rourke said. Full and final. Every dollar you put into that arrangement is accounted for and returned. Something changed in Bram's face. A shift from the belligerent position toward something sharper and less certain. It was processing. Elowen could watch the processing happen. That's not, Bram started. That doesn't settle. There's nothing left to settle, Rourke said. You made an arrangement. You broke it publicly, on a platform, in front of this town. The money is what you spent. It's returned. That's the end of your claim. I don't have a claim on her, Bram said quickly, like he'd realized how the alternative sounded. I never said I had a claim on her. I'm just saying there were expenses that are now paid, Rourke said. Bram looked at the documents. He looked at the people who had gathered in that particular casual but not way. He looked at Elowen for the first time. She looked back at him. She thought about what she wanted to say. She had thought about it on the drive in, had rehearsed a few versions, had discarded all of them because none of them were what she actually wanted, which was less than she'd expected. What she wanted, she had realized somewhere on the drive, was not to defeat Bram Harker or to humiliate him or to make him feel what she had felt on that platform. What she wanted was simpler. She wanted to not be afraid of him. Looking at him now, in this February morning light, with the documents in Rourke's hand and the town watching and Bram's recalculating face in front of her, she wasn't. I'm not angry with you, she said. It surprised her that she meant it. You made a decision I didn't agree with, in a way I wouldn't have chosen. But you did me a favor I didn't understand at the time. She held his gaze. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Bram stared at her. Take the documents, Elowen said. Take the money. There's nothing else here for you. He took the documents. He stood there with them in his hands for a moment, and then he looked at Rourke, and then back at her. And then he turned and went back into the boarding house without another word, which was possibly the most dignified exit available to him under the circumstances, and she gave him credit for taking it. The street was quiet for a moment, then Mavis appeared in the doorway of the dry goods store. Well, she said, that's done. It was the kind of observation that summed things up. Rourke looked at Elowen, she looked at him. There was something between them in that moment that had the quality of a sentence that neither of them said out loud, which was fine. Some things are better understood in silence on a cold street while a town reconstitutes itself around you. They went to the dry goods store and got Maisie's candy and the supplies they needed, and they drove home. On the way back, Rourke said, What you said to him? Yes, Elowen said. Did you mean it? She thought about it carefully, the way she thought about things that deserved careful thought. About being where I'm supposed to be? Yes. She looked at the road ahead, the tracks of the wagon wheels, their own from this morning, already set in the packed snow. I meant it, she said. I wasn't saying it for effect. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. He didn't say anything else. She didn't either. But the silence was a different quality than the silences they'd had in October and November. Not the silence of two people who don't know each other yet, but the silence of people who have run out of anything they need to say and find the quiet comfortable rather than awkward. That was new. She noticed it. What she didn't notice, because she was looking at the road, was that Rourke was looking at her. The rest of February moved. Raven Hollow settled into the kind of semi-peace that small communities achieve when the main subject of gossip has been resolved by actual events rather than speculation. There was still talk, because there was always talk, but the quality of it changed, and Mavis reported that several people who had been unkind about Elowen in December and January had found reasons not to be unkind anymore. You're good for business, Mavis said, on a March supply run, in her particular dry way. People come in and they ask about you. I tell them the truth. The truth is better than whatever they were imagining. What were they imagining? Elowen asked. Something more interesting, Mavis said. The truth is that you showed up in a terrible situation and you made yourself useful and you didn't collapse when it was hard. People around here respect that. They just needed time to decide to. How long does deciding usually take? Mavis considered. Somewhere between one winter and two, she said. Elowen laughed. Not a polished laugh, a real one, the kind that comes when something lands exactly right. It surprised her. She had not laughed a great deal since November. The sound of it in the dry goods store felt almost foreign, and then, immediately, not. Mavis looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. You should do that more, she said. The March thaw came the second week of the month. Tentative at first, the kind of thaw that promises more than it delivers, but enough to make the east section of the barn accessible for assessment. Rourke walked the collapsed area with Tobin beside him, both of them looking at what needed to come out and what could be salvaged and what had to be rebuilt from scratch. Elowen came out and stood at the edge of it. The scope of the rebuild was significant. She had known that. but seeing it in March light rather than storm conditions made it concrete in a way that the abstract knowledge hadn't been. "Timber," Rourke said, not to anyone specific, just a man calculating out loud. "The south post can stay. The east wall needs to come down and go up new. The roof frame," he looked up at the angle. "Most of that's a loss." "The boards from the fallen section," Tobin said. He was examining a stack of them, turning one over with his boot. "Some of these are good still. Dry timber. They were protected under the snow. I could sort them." "That would help," Rourke said. "I've been reading the woodworking manual," Tobin said. He said it in the sideways manner of someone presenting information that they don't want to make too much of. "The one on the shelf. It has a section on barn construction." Rourke looked at his son. "Does it?" "I took notes." A pause. I wrote some things down. I don't know if they're useful." "Show me," Rourke said. Tobin went in to get the notes. Rourke watched him go with the expression Elowen had come to associate with those particular moments when a parent sees something in their child that they hadn't expected yet, something that shifts the frame slightly. He looked at Elowen. "He's going to be a better builder than I am," he said. "Probably," Elowen agreed. He stopped. "I didn't teach him that. He watches," Elowen said. "He pays attention to everything and he stores it. He's been doing it his whole life." She looked at the collapsed section. "You gave him that. That's not a thing that comes from nowhere." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. "Elowen," he said. Something in the way he said it, differently than usual. She looked at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that the answer can be no. This isn't pressure. There's no arrangement attached to it. No expectation. You can say no, and nothing changes." She waited. He looked at the collapsed barn wall. He looked at the horses in the paddock, Casper, fully recovered, moving with the confident ease of an animal that has decided it's going to be magnificent. He looked at Tobin's notes in the window of the house where the light caught the paper. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not through spring. Not until something else comes up. I want you to stay because—" He stopped. He appeared to have prepared something and lost the thread of it. He started again, differently. "Because this house it's better. With you in it. Not because you do the work, although you do, and it matters, but because Maisie laughs more. And Tobin is learning things because someone showed him how to try. And A pause. "I know what the word is. I'm not going to say it yet because I don't think the timing is right, and I don't want to make this into something you feel you have to respond to. But I know what the word is." Elowen looked at him. She thought about the platform. The envelope. $43. A wagon seat in November with a man she didn't know driving her toward a house she hadn't seen. She thought about all the things that had happened between that moment and this one. The grain, the horses, the bread, the storm, the gray on the fence line, the documents on the street. She thought about Maisie sewing badly with her tongue between her teeth and Tobin's horse on the shelf beside the photograph. She thought about the particular feeling of moving towards something rather than away from it, which she had noticed and not named in the aftermath of the storm. She had a word for it now. "I know what the word is too," she said. Rourke looked at her. "I'm not ready to say it either," she said. "But I know what it is." She held his gaze. "And yes, I'll stay." He didn't say anything. The moment didn't need it. The collapsed barn wall was in front of them, and the horses were in the paddock, and the cold was still in the air, despite March's tentative promises. And he nodded once, the way he nodded when a thing was settled without needing to be made large. They stood there for a moment longer. "The timber needs sorting before we can start planning the rebuild," Elowen said. "It does," Rourke agreed. "I can help Tobin with that this afternoon if you want to start on the foundation assessment." "That works," he said. She went in to get her work gloves and Tobin's notes, and she thought about a word she wasn't ready to say out loud yet, and she thought about the particular freedom of deciding to want something instead of just deciding to survive. And she was glad, in the particular, uncomplicated, inconvenient way of being glad, that she had put the envelope back on the rail on a November platform and walked away. It had brought her here. And here, she had decided, was where she was going to stay. The timber sorting took 3 days. Tobin turned out to be meticulous about it in the way he was meticulous about most things he decided to care about. Each board examined, tapped, assessed for soundness, sorted into 3 categories that he had written on pieces of paper and weighted down with rocks at the edge of the work area. Keep, maybe, burn. Elowen worked beside him without trying to run the operation, which she understood instinctively was important. This was his project. She was the extra pair of hands. They didn't talk constantly. That was one of the things she had come to appreciate about Tobin. He was comfortable in the same silence his father was comfortable in, the kind that meant thinking was happening rather than nothing. When he did talk, it was usually because he had something specific to say. "Papa's going to need help with the framing," he said, on the second afternoon examining a board that had a crack running 3/4 of its length. "Burn," he added, and put it in the 3rd pile. "He's good at horses and he knows enough about building to keep things standing, but he doesn't always get the angles right. The chicken shelter is 2 degrees off plumb." "I noticed that," Elowen said. "It makes the door stick in summer when the wood swells." He picked up the next board. "Keep," he said, and set it in the 1st pile. "I've been thinking about the framing for the east wall. If we run the posts here." He picked up his notebook, the one with the notes from the woodworking manual, and showed her a rough sketch. "And use a double header across the top instead of a single, we get more load capacity for the roof. It costs more timber, but the wall won't go the same way the old one did." Elowen looked at the sketch. It was rough. He was 13, not an engineer. But the logic was sound. She pointed at one section. "What are you doing at the corner joint?" "That's where I'm not sure," he said. "The manual shows a lap joint, but I don't know if that's right for this." "It depends on what you're tying it to," Elowen said. "Show your father. He'll know." Tobin looked at the sketch. "What if it's wrong?" "Then he'll tell you and you'll adjust it," she said. "That's how you find out." He looked at her with the expression she had come to know as his version of reluctant agreement, not quite admitting she was right, but operating as if she was. "Okay," he said. He showed Rourke that evening. Elowen stayed in the kitchen and listened to the 2 of them at the table. The low back and forth of a man and his son working through a problem together, the occasional scratch of pencil on paper, Rourke's voice explaining something and Tobin's voice asking a question and Rourke's voice adjusting its answer based on the question. It went on for almost an hour. When Tobin came to bed, he stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Elowen with a very specific expression, one she had not seen from him before, which was something closer to open than he had managed in the 4 months she had been here. "He said the double header was right," Tobin said, "and the corner joint. He said to use a mortise and tenon instead of the lap. He showed me how." "Good," Elowen said. "He said—" Tobin stopped. He looked at the floor for a second. "He said he didn't know I'd been thinking about this stuff, the building stuff. He said if I keep at it, he knows a man in the eastern settlements who does proper carpentry work and takes apprentices." He looked back up. "In a few years, when I'm old enough." Elowen looked at him. At this boy who had spent 18 months being afraid of what was going to happen to the things he loved, and who was standing in a kitchen doorway talking about a few years from now like it was a real destination rather than a hypothetical one. "That sounds like something worth working toward," she said. He nodded. He went upstairs. Elowen sat with her tea and listened to the house settle into its nighttime sounds. Rourke's footsteps moving through the main room, the particular creak of the 3rd stair, the quiet that followed. She thought about the words she and Rourke had both acknowledged knowing without saying, out loud, in the March light beside the collapsed barn wall. She thought about how strange it was that the most significant conversation she'd had in years had contained almost none of the words that would have made it legible to anyone else. She thought, this is what it looks like when something is real. It doesn't announce itself. It just becomes the thing you're living inside before you fully noticed it happened. Spring arrived. The way spring arrives in hard winter country. Not graciously, not in a single morning of warmth and birdsong, but in contested stages, the cold retreating and then coming back for 3 more days and then retreating again, the ground going soft and then refreezing, and then finally, toward the end of April, committing to thaw in a way that felt like a decision rather than an accident. The spring buyers came in the first week of May. There were 4 of them, men from the Northern Territories who traveled together in a group and had been buying from Rourke for 2 seasons. They arrived on a Tuesday, looked at the horses in the paddock, and the horses in the barn, and the cleared east section where the new wall was already two-thirds framed, and then sat down at the kitchen table where Elowen had put out coffee and food that was better than they were expecting. One of them, a heavy-set man named Vickers, who appeared to be the primary decision-maker, ate 2 biscuits before he said anything about horses. Then he looked at Rourke and said, "That roan." "Casper," Rourke said. "He's the one you said was sick in winter." "He was," Rourke said. "He's not sick now." Vickers looked at Elowen, which was a slight surprise to her. "You're the woman who managed the feed situation," he said. It wasn't a question. "I found contaminated grain early enough to make a difference," she said. "Mr. Halden made the decisions about the horses." Vickers looked at Rourke. "She's modest. She's accurate," Rourke said. Vickers drank his coffee. "The roan," he said again. "What are you asking?" The number Rourke said was not modest. Elowen had heard him calculating it for 2 months, and she knew it was right. She had done her own arithmetic, which had arrived at the same figure from a different direction. But it was still not a modest number, and she watched Vickers process it with the expressionless face of a man who has made a career of not reacting to prices in front of sellers. "That's higher than last year," Vickers said. "He's a better horse than anything I had last year," Rourke said. "And I think you know that, or you wouldn't have asked about him first." Vickers looked at his coffee. He looked at the other 3 men, who were all looking at the table with the deliberate disengagement of people who have agreed not to show their hand. He looked at Rourke. "The other 5?" he said. Rourke named his prices for all 6 horses, Casper and the 5 others, each one priced individually, each price defensible and defended when Vickers pushed back on 2 of them. Elowen refilled the coffee and said nothing and listened to the negotiation with the part of her brain that had been doing this kind of arithmetic since she was 15 years old. And she watched Rourke hold his position on Casper and the gray and give slightly on the 2 middle horses in a way that gave Vickers the feeling of having gained something while Rourke still walked away with what he needed. They settled before noon. It was more than enough, considerably more, not because Rourke had been lucky, but because Casper had come through the winter in better condition than any of the buyers had expected, and because the gray, the horse that had spent a night in a blizzard in a stranger's lean-to, was sound and strong and showing none of the lasting effects that a bad night in bad weather could leave on a horse that was less constitutionally solid than she turned out to be. Vickers shook Rourke's hand on the way out and looked at Elowen once more. "Good biscuits," he said, which she understood was the highest form of acknowledgement he was likely to deploy. "Thank you," she said. They watched the buyers go. Rourke stood in the yard and watched the wagon until it was out of sight, and then he stood there a little longer, not talking, doing the particular kind of processing that happens when something you've been working toward for a very long time actually comes through, and your body needs a moment to catch up to the fact. Elowen stood beside him. "The east wall rebuild is fully covered," he said finally. "The grazing land money is back, with enough over to put toward the Carver parcel in fall." He was still looking at where the wagon had been. "And Casper's going somewhere he's going to be appreciated. Vickers doesn't mistreat animals. I've watched him long enough to know that." "You always cared about where they went," Elowen said. "They're not objects," he said. I know." He turned to look at her. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Different from what I asked you in March." She waited. "In March I asked you to stay," he said. "I meant that, and I'm glad you said yes. But I've been thinking about what staying means. For you specifically." He looked at her directly, the way he always did when he was saying something that mattered. "You came here with 1 suitcase and an arrangement that fell apart. You built something here. You built a significant portion of what made this winter survivable. But it's my name on this land. It's my property in the eyes of the settlement and the territory." He paused. "I want to change that, if you want me to." Elowen looked at him. "I'm asking you to marry me," he said, "and I'm asking because I want you to. Not because the children need a mother. They've found their own way to whatever they're going to be to you, and that's between you and them. Not because the ranch needs another pair of hands. Because I want to spend whatever time I have left building things beside you, and I want your name on this land beside mine, and I want people to understand that you're not here temporarily or on sufferance or because you had nowhere else to go." He breathed. "You chose here. I want the world to know you chose it." The yard was very quiet. The horses that remained, The ones not sold, the two that Rourke had kept back for breeding, were moving slowly in the paddock. The new east wall framing was visible past the barn door. The doubleheader Tobin had insisted on bright against the older timber around it. Elowen thought about the platform. She thought about it clearly, the way you can think about something clearly when you're far enough from it in time that it has become a story, rather than a wound you're managing. She thought about a man putting an envelope on a rail and a woman who had not picked it up. She thought about all the ways that moment could have gone differently and all the ways it hadn't, and the long, strange path between that November afternoon and this May morning. She thought about what it meant to belong to a place. She had never belonged to a place before. Not really. She had occupied places, had been useful in places, had survived in places. But belonging was different. Belonging was mutual. It meant the place had decided about you as much as you had decided about it. Yes, she said. Rourke nodded. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not in the way of a romantic gesture performed for an audience. Just the plain taking of a hand by someone who has decided something and is marking it physically. His hand was rough from winter work and warm despite the morning air, and she held it back with equal plainness. They stood like that for a moment in the May yard. "We should tell Maisie before she hears it somewhere else," Rourke said. Elowen almost laughed. "Yes," she said. "We should." Maisie, when told, sat with the information for approximately 4 seconds, and then asked if she could be the one to put flowers on the table for the wedding, because she had seen a wedding the previous summer when the Harlow family's eldest daughter had married the schoolteacher, and there had been flowers on every table, and Maisie had considered this the single most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed in her 7 years of life. "Yes," Elowen said. "You can absolutely put flowers on the table." Maisie looked satisfied in the way of a person who has achieved a goal they have been nursing privately. "What kind?" she said. "Whatever's blooming," Elowen said. "In May, that's mostly just the yellow ones by the south fence," Maisie said. "They're not fancy." "They're fine," Elowen said. Maisie considered. "I could also use some of the rosemary from the garden, if it came back." She was thinking out loud. "Rosemary and yellow flowers. That would be good." "That would be very good," Elowen said. Tobin came in from the barn in the middle of this conversation, reading the room with the speed of a boy who has developed excellent situational awareness from years of practice, and looked at his father, and then at Elowen, and then at Maisie, who was already moving toward the window to assess the south fence flower situation. "Is something happening?" he said. "Your father asked me to marry him," Elowen said. She said it straightforwardly because Tobin deserved things said straight. Tobin was quiet for a long moment. She watched him, watched the thoughts move across his face in the way thoughts moved across Tobin's face, which was not like other people's faces, more compressed and internal. The conclusions arriving before the working was visible. "Does that change things?" he said. "For the paperwork," Rourke said. "For anything else?" Tobin said. He was looking at Elowen specifically, which she understood was important. He was asking her, not his father. He was asking what it meant for the particular arrangement that had grown between them, which was not a mother and son arrangement in any traditional sense, but was something, and had been becoming more of a something for several months. Elowen looked at him. "You're 13, she said. "You're going to be a carpenter. In a few years, you're going to go work with whoever your father finds in the eastern settlements, and you're going to get good at it. And you're going to come back here and build things that last. That's all still true. The only thing that changes is that you'll have to share the kitchen permanently." The corner of his mouth moved. "I already share the kitchen permanently." "Then nothing changes," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded. Once, the way his father nodded when something was settled. And he went to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee, which he had recently started drinking and was clearly still pretending to enjoy more than he did. "The mortise and tenon joint on the east wall is going to need another day," he said to Rourke. "The timber's still a little green. I don't want to set it until it's right." "Agreed," Rourke said. And that was Tobin's contribution to the moment, which was exactly right, and everyone in the kitchen understood it. They married in the second week of June, in the yard of the Halden homestead, which Maisie had been decorating with increasing intensity for 4 days. Yellow flowers from the south fence, rosemary from the garden that had come back stronger than expected, 2 branches of something white and small-flowered that she had found near the creek and carried back in her fist like a prize. She put them in jars and tin cups and arranged them with the serious creative vision of a 7-year-old who knows what she wants even if she doesn't have the vocabulary to explain it. The arrangement was small. Mavis came, which felt right. The judge from the next settlement over came because Rourke had done business with him for 10 years. A few neighboring ranch families came because the settlements of hard country develop bonds through difficulty that are not exactly friendship, but are close enough that ignoring a significant event feels like a violation. The Magruder family came, the ones whose lean-to had sheltered the gray on the night of the storm, and Mr. Magruder shook Elowen's hand with the genuine warmth of a man who considers being part of someone else's difficult night to be a form of connection. Nobody from town who had spent December whispering about the unwanted bride was there, except Mavis, who had never been in that category. Mrs. Calvert sent a note that could have been read as congratulatory if you squinted at it from the right angle. Elowen read it, set it aside, and did not think about it again. The ceremony itself was short. The judge spoke, they said what needed to be said, and the thing was done. What Elowen remembered afterward was not the words but the specifics. The way the morning light came through the leaves of the tree at the south edge of the yard. The smell of rosemary from the jars on the tables. Maisie standing slightly behind her in a dress she had insisted on wearing, despite it being more suited to a warmer day than the one they had, holding a small bunch of flowers in both hands, with the concentrated solemnity of someone who has been given an important job and is doing it with everything they have. Tobin stood beside his father. He did not cry. He did not look away. When the thing was done and people started moving toward the tables, he came to Elowen with the directness he had when something mattered, and he decided not to be indirect about it. "I've been thinking about what to call you," he said. Elowen waited. "Not Mama," he said. That's already somebody. That name belongs to somebody." "I know," Elowen said. "I never expected it." "But Miss Voss is wrong now," he said. "And just Elowen feels—" He stopped, started again. "Like maybe it's not enough. For what this is." She looked at this boy. 14 and 2 months, nearly her height, with his father's way of meeting things straight on, and his own particular way of thinking through problems until they were solved properly, rather than conveniently. She thought about a hay bale in a barn in November and a horse carving with a wrong neck angle. She thought about bread dough behind the barn and the way he had put flour on the counter without being asked. "You could call me Elowen," she said. "Just that. And when it needs to mean more than just that, you'll know, and so will I." He considered this. "Okay," he said. He went to help set out the food because that was Tobin. He always found the practical thing to do when the emotional thing was finished. Elowen stood in the yard in June light and breathed. She thought, "This is what I have. This yard, this house, this man, these children, this land where the horses grow strong. This town that misjudged me and came around and will probably misjudge me again about something else at some point, because that's what towns do. This life that I did not plan and could not have predicted from a railway platform in November with 1 suitcase and $43 and nowhere to go." She thought, this is enough. More than enough. The kind of more that you can't plan for, that you can only walk toward one decision at a time. Summer at the Halden homestead that year was the busiest Elowen had experienced in her life, which was saying something given that her life had not been short on busy. The east wall rebuild reached completion in July. Tobin's double-header holding exactly as he had predicted, the mortise and tenon joints set right, the structure sounder than what had stood before the storm. A carpenter named Aldous Crane from the Millhaven settlement came out to look at it in August, having heard through the regional grapevine that a rancher's son was showing unusual aptitude, and he walked the whole structure with Tobin beside him, asking questions and listening to the answers with the attention of a professional, recognizing something he didn't often encounter. "Come find me when you're 16, Crane said to Tobin at the end of it. Tobin looked at him. "What happens when I'm 16? "I'll have something for you to do," Crane said. It was the kind of offer that didn't require elaboration from a man who didn't make offers casually. Tobin came back to the house that afternoon and told Elowen about it with the compressed quality he had when something was large enough that he was choosing his words carefully. 2 years, he said. "That goes faster than you think," Elowen said. "I know." He looked at the new wall. Visible from the kitchen window, the timber still bright. I want to learn everything I can before then. Then learn everything you can, Elowen said. You know how to do that. The boarding house idea came to Elowen in late August, which was when the first of the seasonal travelers began moving through Raven Hollow on their way between territories. Surveyors, traders, families relocating, people on the long roads that ran through the settlement and onward into the wider country. She had watched them pass in previous years without thinking much about it. Now she watched them pass and thought about the spare room. Her old room, the one she had moved out of in June, and which was now sitting with a locked door and a narrow bed and a small iron stove, and a window that looked out toward the barn. She raised it with Rourke over dinner. The room is sitting empty, she said. We have the kitchen capacity to feed travelers. If we put out word that there's a clean room and a meal at the Halden property. You want to run a boarding house, Rourke said. I want to run a boarding house in the room I used to live in, she said. Seasonally. Travelers through spring and fall when the roads are busy. We charge fair rates. It adds income that doesn't depend on the horse market. Rourke looked at her across the table. You've been planning this. Since August. How long is that? 3 weeks, she said. He looked at his coffee. She could see him running numbers. He always ran numbers when she proposed things, not because he distrusted her arithmetic, but because he had an independent need to arrive at the same place from his own direction. It was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him. He didn't defer. He engaged. We'd need another bed frame, he said finally. Tobin can build it, Elowen said. Rourke looked up. He's been doing practice work on the small outbuilding, she said. He made the shelf in the barn. A bed frame is well within what he can do. Rourke was quiet for a moment. He looked at Tobin. Tobin, who had been listening without appearing to listen, looked up from his plate. I can build it, he said. I'd need the wood. I'll get the wood, Rourke said. The first travelers stayed at the Halden homestead in September. A surveyor named Cross, who was mapping the eastern boundary of the territory, and who ate 2 full plates of dinner and slept 12 hours and left the following morning with the satisfied look of a man who has been warm and fed for the first time in a week. He paid what Elowen asked without negotiation and told her on the way out that he would tell others. He was good to his word. By October, they had hosted 6 different groups of travelers in the spare room, and Elowen had established a system that Maisie had appointed herself central to. Fresh linens, a pitcher of water, the particular attention to small details that made a room feel less like a place where strangers slept and more like a place where a person could feel briefly at home. You're good at this, Elowen told Maisie one afternoon, watching her arrange the room with the focused purpose of someone who has found a natural vocation. I like it, Maisie said. She smoothed the blanket on the bed for the 3rd time. I like when people come in tired and leave rested. That's a good thing to like, Elowen said. Is that why you like cooking? Maisie asked. She looked up. Because people come in hungry and leave full? Elowen thought about it. Partly, she said. Partly it's because cooking is a problem to solve. You have what you have and you make something from it. That satisfies me. That's more interesting than just feeding people, Maisie said, with the authority of a child who is building her own understanding of adults and finds them more complex than expected. People are usually more interesting than just the obvious thing, Elowen said. Maisie considered this. Mrs. Calvert doesn't seem more interesting, she said. Elowen kept her face neutral with some effort. Everyone has something, she said. You just can't always see it from the outside. Maisie looked unconvinced but filed it for later consideration. She went back to smoothing the blanket. The fall buyers for the remaining horses. The 2 Rourke had kept back for breeding and 2 new foals born in spring came in October. The prices were good. Not as spectacular as Casper's spring number, but solid, the kind of numbers that indicated Rourke's reputation among buyers had settled into the category of reliable, which was worth more in the long run than spectacular. Elowen did the autumn inventory in November. The first one she had done not as an emergency measure, but as a routine. The first time the Halden homestead's winter stores had been organized from a position of adequacy rather than barely enough. The difference was significant. She stood in the pantry and looked at what they had and felt the particular satisfaction of a problem that had been solved not quickly but thoroughly, worked through layer by layer over a year until the solution had become structural rather than improvised. The evening of the first real snowfall of that second winter, they sat around the kitchen table, all four of them, Rourke with his coffee, and Elowen with her tea, and Tobin with the woodworking manual he had by this point nearly memorized, and Maisie with a new piece of fabric she was attempting to embroider, her stitches considerably improved from the previous winter's attempts, still imperfect, but intentionally so in a way that was different from accidentally so. The snow came down outside the window in the even, unhurried way of snow that isn't trying to prove anything. Rourke looked at the window and then at Elowen and said, "Different from last year." "Very different," she said. "The east wall will hold," Tobin said without looking up from the manual. "I know it will," Rourke said. "You built it." Tobin's ears went slightly red in the way they did when he received praise that landed before he'd had time to prepare against it. Maisie looked at the snow. "I hope no horses have to go out in it," she said. "They're all inside," Rourke said. "Good," she said, and went back to her embroidery. The fire was doing what a good fire does, which is fill a room with the kind of warmth that has weight to it, that pushes the cold to the edges and holds the center for the people who need it. Elowen watched the snow and thought about the same snow from a year ago. The platform, the cold, the particular quality of a day when everything she had planned had ceased to exist. She thought about the exact dimensions of what she had been carrying then, the fear that she had mistaken for calm, the calculation that she had mistaken for peace, the survival mode she had been operating in for so long that she had stopped noticing it was all she was doing. She was not in survival mode now. She was living. Those were different. She had learned the difference from a man who didn't say much and meant everything he said, and from a boy who carved horses out of wood because he needed to make something with his hands, and from a girl who put flowers in tin cups on a June morning with the absolute conviction that small, beautiful things mattered. She thought, here is what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. Not skills. She had always had skills. Something more than skills. The knowledge that belonging is not granted. That a person can arrive somewhere with nothing and still choose to take up space, to do the work, to be present in a way that builds something durable. That the people who leave you stranded are sometimes, accidentally, the people who bring you exactly where you needed to arrive. Not because they meant to, not because you owe them anything for it, just because that's how some roads work. They go through the bad thing to get to the right thing, and the only way is through. She thought about Maisie asking if she could sing, and the particular quality of her laughter on that day in the dry goods store, the sound of it surprising her with its own lightness. She thought about Tobin's notes in a notebook, carried out to show his father, and the look on Rourke's face reading them. She thought about standing in February cold on a street in Raven Hollow, while a man took papers from another man's hand and both of them stood in the space of what had just changed. She thought about what freedom actually was. She had been thinking she'd known that freedom was the absence of obligation, the open road, the nothing owed and nothing claimed. But she had been wrong about that. That wasn't freedom. That was just alone. Freedom was this, being exactly where you wanted to be, having chosen it, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it asked of you and what it gave back, and finding the exchange fair. More than fair. The snow kept coming. Rourke put more wood on the fire without being asked. He sat back down and his knee was close enough to hers under the table that she was aware of the warmth of it, and she didn't move away, and neither did he. "I want to put a sign out," Elowen said, "at the road, for the boarding, so people coming through see it before they've already passed the turn." "Tobin can make a sign," Maisie said immediately, without looking up. "I can make a sign," Tobin agreed. "What should it say?" Rourke asked. Elowen thought about it. "Just the name," she said, "Halden, and that there's a room and a meal." "That's enough?" Rourke asked. "It's exactly enough," she said. "People who need what we have will know it when they see it." He nodded. Maisie looked up from her embroidery. "Elowen," she said. "Yes." "When I grow up, I want to do what you do." She said it with the absolute conviction of a child who has arrived at a conclusion and is not uncertain about it. Make things work when they're not working. Make people feel like they're somewhere they should be. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Rourke was looking at his coffee. Tobin was looking at his manual. Both of them were very deliberately not looking at Elowen, which was their version of giving her the room. "Then that's what you'll do," Elowen said. She said it simply, the way Maisie deserved. Not, "I'm sure you will," or "that's a lovely thing to want," but the thing itself, stated as fact, The future acknowledged rather than qualified. Maisie nodded once, satisfied, and went back to her embroidery. And that was the Halden homestead in its second winter. 4 people around a table in the snow, each of them working on something, each of them going to sleep that night in a house that had been made to hold by the accumulated effort of all of them, no single person's work separable from the rest of it. Years passed, the way years do when a life is full, not quickly, exactly, but without the grinding quality that empty years have, without the sense of time as an obstacle rather than a medium. The boarding house became a known stop on the territorial road. Travelers came through in seasons and left with the particular satisfaction of people who had been treated decently at a price that was fair, and they told others, and others came. Rourke's horses became, over several seasons, something the buyers talked about in the way that quality gets talked about, as a category, not just a product. He expanded the breeding operation in the 3rd year, not dramatically, just methodically, adding 2 mares of excellent lineage that a buyer from the western settlements told him about, and that Elowen's autumn accounts showed they could afford. The grazing land from the Carver parcel came through in the 4th year, at a price that was better than Rourke had originally calculated, because he had waited until Carver needed to sell rather than buying when Carver could still afford to hold out. Tobin went to Aldous Crane at 16. He came back at 18, and then at 20 he went again, this time to a larger operation in the eastern settlements that had gotten word of him through Crane. He came back after 2 years with enough skill and enough saved wages to set up a proper carpentry workshop in the outbuilding on the east side of the Halden property, which he rebuilt himself over a spring and summer, making it exactly what he needed it to be. He built furniture. He built structures for neighboring ranches. He built a cradle, once, for a family in Raven Hollow, whose surname he didn't mention at dinner, and Elowen noticed that he came home from the delivery quieter than he'd left, in a way that suggested something had moved in him that he was still figuring out. She didn't ask. He would tell her when he was ready, or he wouldn't, and either was his right. I was also, by the time he was 22, teaching woodworking to 2 boys from the settlement, the sons of a ranch family whose property had hit hard times, and who had asked Tobin, not Rourke, not anyone else, but Tobin, which was its own kind of full circle. Maisie grew up the way children grow up in households where someone made them feel like their instincts were worth listening to, with a very clear sense of what she was good at and a reasonable relationship with what she wasn't. She took over the boarding house management at 15 with a seriousness that surprised the travelers who didn't know her and didn't surprise anyone who did. At 17, she was corresponding with a woman in the Southern Territories who ran a larger hospitality operation and who had heard about the Halden boarding through the Traveler Network, and who had written to ask Maisie if she had ever considered expanding her knowledge. She had considered it constantly. She went for a season when she was 19. She came back with ideas and notebooks and a clearer version of the things she had always been moving toward, and she sat down with Elowen the first evening back and talked for 2 hours about what she had seen and what she wanted to do with it, and Elowen listened and asked questions and said what she actually thought rather than what was most comfortable. At the end of it, Maisie looked at her. "You always tell me the true thing," she said, "not the nice thing." "They're the same thing sometimes," Elowen said. "Not always." "No," Elowen agreed, "not always. But the true thing is more useful." Maisie thought about this. "I want to be like that," she said. "I'm working on it." "You're better at it than you think," Elowen said. And that was true. Raven Hollow did not change in any dramatic way, because settlements like Raven Hollow don't. They accumulate slowly, add a building here and a family there, develop reputations that spread in the patient way of word of mouth, and become over time what their people make them. What changed, specifically, was what the settlement thought about certain things. What it thought about women who arrived in difficult circumstances and stayed through difficulty and built something from it. What it thought, in other words, about Elowen. Mavis retired from the dry goods store in the 5th year and sold it to a young couple from the north. And at the small gathering that happened in her honor, she stood up and said several things about several people, and one of the things she said was about Elowen, which was that she had arrived in Raven Hollow in November with 1 suitcase and had made the settlement better without ever asking permission to do so. That was Mavis's way of saying what she meant, which was direct and accurate and short, and Elowen would not have had it any other way. She thought about the platform sometimes. Not often, less and less over the years, The way a scar fades, not because it stops existing, but because the skin around it grows and the body incorporates it. She thought about it most on November mornings when the first real cold of the season came down from the north, and she stood in the kitchen of the house that was hers now. Legally, officially, structurally, in every way that mattered, and watched the horses in the paddock through the window that faced east. She thought about the woman who had stood on that platform with $43 and nowhere to go, who had chosen not to beg, and not to perform, and not to take the easy exit, even when the easy exit was the only exit she could see. She had been brave on that platform, she understood now, in a way she hadn't understood at the time. At the time she had only been surviving, which was what she always did. But survival, chosen on purpose, held to without flinching. That was its own kind of courage, and it had taken her a while to see it as such. She was not that woman anymore. Not entirely. She was someone who had come through the other side of that woman's survival and found that there was something on the other side. Not a reward exactly, because life doesn't organize itself that way. Just more life. Larger, warmer, more complicated, more sustaining. She had built it herself. She had also been given it. Both things were true, and neither one canceled the other. Rourke found her at the window on one of those November mornings. The 6th winter, or the 7th, she had stopped keeping precise count, and stood beside her with his coffee and looked out at what she was looking at. "What are you thinking?" he said. She thought about all the things she could say to that. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. He looked at her sideways. The same sideways glance from the early days, the checking look, except that now she understood what it was checking for, which was her. Just her. Whether she was all right, whether she needed anything, whether the day was treating her as it should. "Good," he said. He went back to his coffee. Outside, the horses moved in the cold morning air, their breath making brief clouds that disappeared into the gray, and the smoke from the kitchen chimney rose straight up into a sky that was the particular pale blue of a hard winter morning that is decided to be beautiful anyway. And the house held its warmth the way a well-built house does. Not dramatically, not by making a speech about it, but simply and completely, the way anything holds that was built with care by people who intended it to last. And it did. And it does. That is the whole of it. A woman who arrived with almost nothing, in a place that didn't want her, in a season that did its best to break everything in its path, and who did not break, and who did not leave, and who built something so solid that years later travelers approaching Raven Hollow would see it from the road and know, without knowing why they knew, that this was a place where someone had put everything they had into making it real. The belonging was not granted. It never is. It was built, one choice at a time, one winter at a time, one true thing said out loud at a time, until the life she had made and the life she was living were the same life, indistinguishable from each other, which is the only form of home that lasts.